Hello everyone, this is Fantasy Audiobook. Here you find original fan made audio stories.
The Fukaro's Familia, starting from Danmachi. Part 1. In the far north of the continent, where the cold winds never cease, lies Dragon Valley, one of the world's three great secret realms. Legends say the roar of a giant dragon can tear the sky apart, and its breath is enough to freeze all things. However, 100 miles away from this perilous land, there is a small village almost forgotten by the world. The afternoon sunlight pierced through the sparse clouds, casting a warm glow. The large tree at the village entrance was lush with leaves, casting mottled shadows on the ground. A boy with white hair and blue eyes was lying under the tree, a blade of grass in his mouth, squinting his eyes with a look of utter boredom. 8 years already. The boy muttered to himself, his gaze focusing on a translucent blue panel in front of him, where the slowly scrolling loading bar had barely changed. I say, system, are you actually going to work? You're not some pathetic system that's just a knockoff, are you? The boy's name was Burning Feather. To him, this world was both familiar and strange. 8 years ago, he was still struggling for a living in another world. As a natural-born corporate slave, he worked overtime until late at night. On his way home, he encountered a 100-ton king truck. Despite his best efforts, he couldn't win, and the truck's quota increased by one. Then he transmigrated and came to this different world. For some unknown reason, he had rejuvenated, his body returning to the state of a 1 or 2-year-old, and even his hair and eye color had changed. He also had the standard perk of a transmigrator, a golden finger. A system called Entangled Fate, which claimed it could summon fictional characters, weapons, and even abilities from his memories once it finished charging. But this system was truly unreliable. In 8 years, it had only successfully activated once at the very beginning. Furthermore, due to an unknown error, it had dropped the summoned character into a completely different time and place. According to the system's only feedback, the other party seemed to have been sent to the distant past and was born in the heavenly realm. Heavenly realm. Burning Feather chewed on those words, a bitter smile surfacing on his lips. He naturally knew what this meant. This was a world where gods, feeling bored, descended to the lower world to live with mortals and form familias. Wasn't this the setting of the anime he watched in his past life? Is it wrong to try to pick up girls in a dungeon? The reason he was so certain was because of the person who picked him up from the wilderness 8 years ago. He still remembered that his consciousness was blurred back then, and he only felt a pair of slightly cool hands picking him up. He struggled to open his eyes and saw a cold and beautiful face. Her long silver hair moved slightly in the wind, and her eyes were always closed, as if she were unwilling to see even a fraction of this world. She wore an intricate black Gothic dress, her temperament so noble she didn't seem like a mortal. Her name was Alpea. 8 years was enough for Burning Feather to match his memories with reality one by one. Whether it was Orario, the center of the world that adventurers yearned for, or the 1,000-meter-high rock wall in the distance that separated the village from Dragon Valley, both proved his hypothesis. And Alpea was precisely that monster of talent the gods spoke of in his memories, a member of the Hera Familia, the level 7 known as the Silence. Coupled with that hardy uncle in the village named Chaldo, who was always wiping his greatsword, Burning Feather had completely given up his struggle. He had indeed come to this world full of danger, yet also full of opportunity. The lazy time under the tree shade soon came to an end. Burning Feather spat out the grass stem that had been chewed white, sat up from the grass, and patted the dust and grass clippings off his pants. The sunlight filtered through the gaps in the leaves, casting dancing spots of light on him, feeling warm and cozy. Time to go back. He talked to himself, his voice carrying a hint of familiarity that even he hadn't noticed. If I don't go cook soon, that woman is going to lose her temper again. Alpea's temper was practically harder and colder than the 10,000-year-old ice deep within Dragon Valley. She never showed mercy just because Burning Feather was only a 10-year-old child. Those seemingly slender palms carried a terrifying force when swung. Every strike felt like it was going to shatter his bones. But Burning Feather also admitted that through time after time of discipline, he had learned to dodge, to observe, and to find openings in the opponent's attacks amidst the intense pain. Now, the children of the same age in the village, even those beastman children known for their strength, were no match for him even if they banded together. But he wasn't a masochist. If one could eat a meal peacefully, who would want to get beaten up for no reason? Sometimes, especially in the dead of night when his whole body ached too much to sleep, a flame of resentment would burn in his chest. He would clench his fists and vow to himself, "Just you wait, Alpea. When I grow up, when I become an adventurer, one day, I will defeat you and pin you down." His greatest wish was to one day stand before her as a strong person and defeat her fair and square. He longed intensely to see an expression of bewilderment and shock on that eternally unchanging icy face. She was his savior and the person who raised him. This debt of gratitude was as heavy as a mountain, but this desire for challenge was like a prairie fire, burning more and more fiercely. However, reality was a bucket of cold water. "It's this system again." Burning Feather sighed. He seemed to be bound by some kind of rule, unable to receive any god's favor. Favor was a specialty of this world and one of the few ways for mortals to become stronger. By using their own divine blood as a medium, the gods of the lower world would engrave sacred characters on a mortal's back, thereby stimulating the dormant potential within the mortal's body. Only those who received favor could become adventurers, accumulating experience points through life and death battles with monsters to continuously level up and climb toward peaks unimaginable to commoners. Having survived 8 years of Alpea's hellish training, Burning Feather's physical fitness had long surpassed the scope of his peers. This talent was enough to make any god eager to expand their familia's eyes light up. In the past few years, quite a few gods traveling through had indeed taken an interest in him. They were full of praise for him, considering him a natural-born adventurer. But without exception, when their fingertips brushed across his back, attempting to engrave the favor, the divine blood was like water droplets on a lotus leaf, unable to penetrate no matter what. His body seemed to have an invisible membrane, rejecting the most fundamental laws of this world. After repeated failures, those gods could only give up with regret. Burning Feather gradually became known as the freak who cannot receive favor in the surrounding area, and no more gods came to bother him. He guessed that this was mostly the work of his half-dead, entangled fate system. Perhaps, only when it activated again would he have the chance to set foot on that dream-filled path. Amidst his chaotic thoughts, Burning Feather had already reached the edge of the village, and the small wooden cabin belonging to him and Alpea was visible in the distance. However, his footsteps suddenly halted, and his body tensed up instantly. Because at his doorstep, a figure appeared that shouldn't have been there. It was a young man with neat short black hair and a prominent streak of white dyed into his bangs. His features were so handsome they seemed almost illusory, as if carved by the greatest sculptor without a single flaw. Wearing a well-tailored black trench coat, he stood tall and still, as if he were the center of the world. Not a mortal, but a god. Burning Feather's heart sank. Although the gods of the lower world seal their divine power and live as mortals, their innate divinity and that sense of presence surpassing all things could never be completely hidden. It wasn't the oppression of power, but a difference in the level of life itself. A mortal could clearly distinguish it with just a single glance. An ominous premonition gripped his heart. He saw that Uncle Chaldo was also standing aside. He wasn't wearing his usual casual clothes but had changed into a suit of heavy black armor, with the greatsword he usually spent his time polishing now slung heavily across his back. The cabin door was pushed open, and Alpea stepped out. She was still in her familiar black Gothic gown, her face as expressionless and cold as ever. The three of them stood together, creating a scene of an impending long journey. "Are you leaving, Alpea?" Burning Feather walked over, his voice soft yet exceptionally clear. He didn't ask, "Where are you going?" or, "Why?" He simply stated a fact he had already seen. Hearing his voice, that black-haired god, Erebus, turned his head. His gaze lingered on Burning Feather for a moment with a hint of scrutiny before glancing at the expressionless Alpea, a playful smile curling at the corner of his mouth. "Oh, is this the child you two mentioned? He certainly is interesting, and his talent is quite astounding. What a pity." A trace of regret flashed in Erebus's eyes. As a god, he could see things that mortals could not. The boy before him possessed a maturity far beyond his years, with insight as sharp as a cheetah's. Even more rare was the resilience and character that allowed him to live peacefully under the silence for 8 years. This child was born to live in the blood and fire of the dungeon, not in this remote village. Unfortunately, they had no more time. No time to investigate the secret of why he couldn't receive a favor, and no energy left to plan a future for him. They had a more important, and darker, mission to fulfill. Leave this place and go live in a big city. Alpea finally spoke. She didn't look at Burning Feather but instead took out a heavy cloth bag and tossed it over. This place isn't for you. Her voice was as pleasant as ever, and as cold as ever. Burning Feather instinctively caught the bag. It was extremely heavy, and the crisp clinking of metal came from within. It was currency, and quite a lot of it. He gripped the bag tightly and stood silently where he was, without saying a word. Let's go. Alpea dropped those words and, without giving him another glance, turned and walked toward the outskirts of the village. Her back was resolute, showing not a hint of lingering attachment. Live well, kid. Chaldo stepped forward, and his large, calloused palm patted Burning Feather's shoulder with a gentleness that belied his rugged appearance. Then, he also turned and followed in Alpea's footsteps. Erebus was the last. He walked up to Burning Feather and leaned down, those deep eyes seeming capable of seeing through one's heart. He smiled and said, "Little guy, if you're unwilling to accept this, then do your best to become an adventurer." After saying that, he also turned to leave, his black trench coat tracing a stylish arc in the wind. The figures of the three gradually drew further away, about to disappear at the end of the road. Burning Feather remained silent, like a stone statue. But at the very moment they were about to vanish from sight. Alpea. He shouted the name with all his strength. The slender figure walking at the very front indeed stopped in her tracks. She didn't turn around but just stood there quietly, as if waiting for him to continue. Burning Feather looked at her back, the sadness and confusion on his face swept away. He grinned, revealing a bright smile. "See you tomorrow," he said loudly. Alpea's figure stiffened almost imperceptibly, but in the end, she didn't turn back or answer. After a brief pause, she started walking again, disappearing over the horizon along with the other two. Far from the village, having stepped onto the desolate ancient road of the northern lands, the silent journey felt somewhat oppressive. Carrying his greatsword, Chaldo glanced back at the village whose outline had long since vanished. He suddenly chuckled, breaking the silence. "By the way, Alpea, didn't that kid used to clamor every day that he'd marry you when he grew up? Won't you consider it? It's enough for me to go alone." As soon as he finished speaking, a chill that could almost freeze the soul suddenly descended. Erebus shivered and instinctively moved a couple of steps to the side, distancing himself from the source of that chill. Alpea slowly opened her tightly closed eyes. Her left eye was a deep gray, and her right eye was a translucent green. A pair of heterochromatic eyes now gazed emotionlessly at Chaldo as she said flatly, "If you want to experience death prematurely, I can fulfill that wish for you." Wait. I was just joking to lighten the mood." Chaldo immediately raised his hands in a gesture of surrender and laughed dryly. "Besides, I quite admire that kid. Just for the fact that he dared to say those things to your face and is still alive and kicking, I know he's a man with guts." "Oh." Hearing this, the look of astonishment on Erebus's face was instantly replaced by a deep interest in gossip. Someone actually dared to confess to the silence. And is still alive. That's truly a miracle. Quickly, tell me, what happened? Noisy. Alpea's cold and impatient words instantly cut off their conversation. Chaldo and Erebus immediately shut their mouths. They both knew that if they continued, this woman would truly get angry. And the consequences of a truly enraged silence were more terrifying than facing a giant dragon head-on. The atmosphere returned to a dead silence once more, with only the sound of the three's footsteps and the never-ending cold wind of the northern lands echoing across the open wilderness. "This sun, it's really a bit blinding." Burning Feather raised his hand and rubbed his eyes hard with the back of it, as if doing so could block out that excessively bright sunlight. He sniffled, a hint of a raspy complaint in his voice, as if he truly were just moved to tears by the stinging sun. He maintained this posture until the three figures completely transformed into three small black dots on the horizon, no longer distinguishable. The wind blew from the north, carrying the chill from the depths of Dragon Valley, messing up his white hair and drying the last traces of moisture on his cheeks. He slowly lowered his hand, the faint ease on his face long gone, leaving only a silence unbefitting his age. He turned and walked silently toward the small log cabin. Creak. He pushed the wooden door open gently, and it made a familiar sound. The furnishings inside were the same as ever, simple, tidy, and one could even say a bit lonely. A wooden table, 2 chairs, and a rudimentary stove. Every item felt like an anchor for his memories. He could almost see Alpea sitting in that chair with her eyes closed, quietly listening to the wind, her brow slightly furrowed because of the noisy children outside the window. He could almost smell that, besides the scent of wood and dust in the air, there remained her unique, cold fragrance, like a winter rose atop a snowy mountain peak. He could almost feel himself being stared at by her emotionless eyes because he had done something wrong. That pressure almost made it impossible for him to breathe. 8 years of bits and pieces, arguments, beatings, silent dinners, an occasional clumsy moment of care, countless images flooded his heart at this moment, as clear as if they had happened yesterday. Farewell, Alpea. Burning Feather tilted his head back, blinking hard in an attempt to force back the warmth welling up again. But this time, the tears were no longer under control, they slid silently down his cheeks and dripped onto the old floor, spreading into a small, dark water stain. He knew better than anyone that the "see you tomorrow" from just now was merely an unrealistic fantasy, a lie to support himself so he wouldn't break down in front of them. Alpea suffered from a terminal illness. A decay originating from the soul that even the gods were powerless against. This was the price brought by that curse known as talent, which was envied by the gods. He also knew the purpose of her and Uncle Chaldo's trip. They would transform into absolute evil, using what little remained of their lives to ignite the potential of Orario's new generation of adventurers, becoming the cruelest and most effective trial on their path to growth. They would use their own destruction to compose a hymn of hope. How great, yet how cruel. He knew he couldn't stop her. That woman was so stubborn, so willful, once she made a decision, even a god couldn't make her turn back. Moreover, what standing did he have to stop her? A burden she had picked up. A mortal who couldn't even receive a favor. He could do nothing. Powerlessness was like a giant net, binding him tightly. Watching the person he liked resolutely walk toward the abyss of destruction while he could only stand in place, without even the qualification to reach out and ask her to stay. This feeling was like a dull knife repeatedly cutting at his chest. Every breath was accompanied by a heart-wrenching pain. For the first time, Burning Feather experienced so clearly what it meant to have one's heart pierced with pain. 8 years of being raised, for an ordinary child, this might have turned into deep familial affection. But for Burning Feather, who possessed the soul of an adult, this feeling had long since quietly changed through their day-to-day interactions. He looked at the pain hidden beneath her icy exterior, at her loneliness from bearing sins alone, that pity and admiration eventually fermented into something called love. Even though this was just his one-man show. But Burning Feather clenched his fists, his nails digging deep into his palms, the resulting sting cleared his chaotic thoughts slightly. I haven't despaired. He muttered to himself, a glimmer of madness and determination flashing in his eyes. The laws of this world state that after an adventurer dies, their soul returns to the heavens. Fine, then I'll go to the heavens and snatch your soul back. My system can summon existences from fantasy. Then, items that can bring people back from the dead, miracles that can reverse causality, must also exist in some world. He would not accept this ending. He had no right to cry, and even less time to despair. Alpea chose to fight in her way, so he, too, would use his own way to struggle against this predetermined fate. Time is the most impartial hourglass, it never stops for anyone. Spring went and autumn came, winter and summer alternated. 6 years of time passed in the blink of an eye. The small village in the north was as it had always been, peaceful and harmonious. In the early morning, the door of the log cabin was pushed open. A youth with a tall and straight posture walked out. He was already 16 years old, his short white hair from back then had grown a bit longer, and the childish innocence had faded from his blue eyes, becoming deep and calm. The polishing of years had made his facial features more defined, and his handsome face always carried a faint touch of aloofness. Burning Feather, going to train again. You really are diligent. The neighboring blacksmith uncle, carrying a hammer, greeted him with a smile. Good morning, Uncle Huck. Burning Feather nodded slightly in acknowledgement. He walked through the village, nodding hello to every villager he met, and then headed toward a dense forest outside the village with practiced ease. That place had been his secret base for the past 6 years, and also his training ground. Although he still couldn't be inscribed with a favor and couldn't become an adventurer, he had never given up exercising for even a single day. He polished his body and techniques in the most rigorous and primitive ways, all for that moment that would eventually arrive. 6 years ago, not long after Alpea and the others left, the Great Feud event that shocked the entire world broke out. Passing merchant travelers brought news of Orario, in Burning Feather's ears, that tragic battle that lasted a full 7 days and was called the 7 Days of Darkness, sounded like a series of familiar full stops. He knew that Alpea, Chaldo, and that deity he had met once, Erebus, had all completed their missions. He knew that Alpea had already passed on her will and hope, like a spark, to the new generation of heroes in Orario. But he wouldn't allow it. He absolutely would not accept it. On what basis is your hope passed to others? On what basis must you use your own sacrifice to fulfill the greatness of others? Burning Feather gritted his teeth, the wooden sword in his hand swinging faster, bringing about bursts of sharp wind. He would use his own way and his own will to change all of this. He would personally stand before her, defeat her fair and square, and then tell her, your hero can only be me. Today, as usual, after finishing his extreme physical training, Burning Feather sat on a rock to rest. It was at this moment that the interface in his mind, which had been silent for a full 14 years, finally underwent a change. System charging progress, 99.9%. 100%. Charging complete. Entangled fate, system, restarting. Connecting to the original summoning target. Connection successful. Summoning. Almost at the same time, high in the distant sky, a brilliantly radiant blue meteor streaked across the firmament, as if tearing a hole in the heavens themselves. Burning Feather had seen this sight a few times in the past years. The elders in the village said it was an anomaly that only appeared when deities from the heavenly realm descended to the mortal world. But this time, he felt something different. That meteor seemed to be coming for him. A connection in the dark, like an invisible thread, tightly pulled him and that light in the sky together. Burning Feather snapped his gaze toward the system panel in front of him, where lines of new text were emerging. Summoned character successfully contacted. Her name is, Queen of all waters, all kindreds, all peoples and all laws, God of water and justice, Fokalers. Boom. Before he could digest this shocking information, the blue meteor, trailing a long tail of flame, crashed with unerring precision onto the open ground not far in front of him. Light soared into the sky, forming a massive pillar of radiance that dyed everything around it in a dreamlike azure. The powerful energy impact made him subconsciously squint and raise his arm to block his face. The light dissipated. A figure stood quietly in the center of the light pillar. She had long white hair, with strands of pale blue interspersed, as if clear lake water had been blended into moonlight. At the top of her head, a playful ahoge stood tall, swaying gently with the breeze. Beneath eyelashes shaped like azure water droplets were a pair of unforgettable heterochromatic eyes. The left eye was a deep navy blue, as if hiding an endless deep sea, while the right eye was a translucent light blue, like the sky after a fresh rain. Those peculiar teardrop-shaped pupils made her look both divine and possessed of a heart-wrenching fragility. She wore a small, exquisite crown-style top hat printed with an iris pattern, and a uniquely tailored blue formal suit paired with pure white shorts and black leg rings, an elegance infused with a touch of heroic spirit. The familiar appearance, combined with the faint sense of intimacy from the depths of his soul, made Burning Feather understand instantly. This was the one who had been sent to the heavenly realm 14 years ago due to a system error, his original summon. The girl seemed a bit dazed. She raised her hand, her slender fingers bashfully twirling a lock of hair. Her beautiful heterochromatic eyes looked at Burning Feather with a hint of apology. I'm sorry. Her voice was crisp and pleasant, like the tinkling of spring water. I seem to have overslept. Burning Feather stared at her blankly, at this deity who was late by a full 14 years. The long wait, the solitary perseverance, all the resentment and pain, at this moment, it was as if they had all found an outlet for release. The lines of his mouth slowly curved upward, eventually turning into a heartfelt, incredibly relieved smile. It's okay. He said softly, his voice carrying a tremor he hadn't even noticed himself. It's not your fault. My lady goddess. The system had restarted, and his deity had returned. Everything was still in time. That's right, I am your lady goddess. Hearing Burning Feather's trembling address, Fina seemed instantly injected with endless vitality. The previous days and apology vanished instantly. She straightened her small frame, placed her hands on her hips, and struck what she imagined to be her most majestic pose, announcing in a high-pitched voice. From now on, feel free to rely on me. Under my brilliant leadership, our familia will surely become the most shining and justice-upholding familia on the continent. And I, Focolars, will eventually become the queen who reigns at the peak of Orario, revered by all people. She let out a series of laughs she thought were imposing, the ahoge on her head bobbing along, looking very proud of herself. Looking at her like this, the turmoil and complex emotions in Burning Feather's heart were gradually replaced by a warm amusement. The smile in his eyes could no longer be hidden. He bowed slightly and played along with a theatrical, solemn tone. Yes, I understand, my queen. Don't actually call me that. Burning Feather's deadpan response had an unexpectedly strong effect. Furina's queenly aura collapsed instantly. Her exquisite little face flushed bright red in a flash, her hands waved frantically, and she spoke incoherently. It was just a metaphor, a declaration of momentum. If you really call me that, it's too embarrassing. She felt like her toes were so awkward they were about to dig a luxurious 3-bedroom, 1-living-room palace out of the hard ground. Seeing her distressed look, Burning Feather finally couldn't help but laugh out loud. This laughter was relaxed and sincere, dispelling the gloom accumulated over 14 years of waiting and melting the final trace of estrangement from their first meeting. It was as if an invisible bond had long since tied their fates tightly together. Without needing many words, a sense of intimacy originating from the depths of the soul arose naturally. After some light-hearted banter, the two sat side by side on the rock, and Burning Feather finally asked the biggest question in his heart. What exactly happened when you were summoned to the heavenly realm back then? What point in time was it? What did you do there? At the mention of this, the excitement on Furina's face turned back into a bit of embarrassment and guilt. She twirled the ends of her hair with her finger, her gaze drifting aimlessly. Well, it's a long story. Actually, I don't know that much myself. She muttered softly. I only remember that when I gained consciousness, I was already in the heavenly realm. Then, for some reason, I became the deity in charge of the authority of water and justice in this world, possessing eternal life. She paused, as if trying hard to recall something. But, most of the time, I seemed to be sleeping in a very beautiful, very quiet place. The one who truly socialized and handled affairs in the heavenly realm was another me, the true God Focolars. Another you. Burning Feather keenly caught the keyword. Yes. Furina nodded, her expression somewhat subtle. We are two sides of the same coin. She is the rational, divine side, while I am her humanity. She maintains the dignity of a god on the outside, while I'm responsible for sleeping and dreaming. She felt the explanation was a bit ridiculous herself and couldn't help but stick out her tongue. The heavens have no clear concept of time at all. I only know that a very, very long time passed, so long that even my divine self grew bored and chose to fall into a deep slumber. That was until I heard your call. I was awakened from my dreams by a powerful force. It was only then that I realized my mission was to descend to the lower world to find you. Burning Feather listened quietly, understanding dawning in his heart. So that was it. The system had summoned her to the past, where she became a deity in the heavens. Only today did it wake her from her slumber and send her back to his side. All the waiting finally had an answer at this moment. Let's go. I'm taking you home. Burning Feather stood up and reached out his hand to her. Home. Furina blinked, startled for a moment, and then her beautiful heterochromatic eyes lit up. She happily took his hand. When Burning Feather brought Furina back to the village, it inevitably caused a small stir. The villagers stopped their chores, curiously eyeing the beautiful young girl who had suddenly appeared. But their gazes held only curiosity, not excessive questioning. Because they could tell at a glance that this girl was no mortal. That seemingly innate, indescribable aura of holiness and that face too perfect to be human all clearly manifested her status as a deity. For this small village, which saw adventurers and divine familia passing through year-round to explore Dragon Valley, the appearance of a god was rare but not unacceptable. Burning Feather led Furina through the village and back to the small log cabin. This is it. He pushed open the door. Furina curiously examined the interior furnishings. Though simple, the place was spotless, exuding an atmosphere of lonely yet resilient living. Burning Feather didn't waste time on pleasantries. He turned around, his deep blue eyes looking directly at Fina with a burning and determined gaze. Fina, carve the favor onto me. He had waited for this day for far, far too long. If not for that fool system's restrictions, he might have joined just any familia long ago, if only to gain the qualification to stand at the starting line. Fina read the urgency and longing in his eyes. She nodded vigorously, her own face full of excitement. Of course. I've wanted to establish our own familia for a long time. I'll show those guys in the heavens that I, Fina, am not just some shut-in goddess who only knows how to sleep. In this world, establishing a familia and witnessing the growth of its children was the greatest joy for almost every deity who descended to the lower world. As the human side of folklores, she was equally full of yearning for this. Without the slightest hesitation, Burning Feather decisively took off his shirt. The youth's lean and well-proportioned upper body was exposed to the air. Years of self-disciplined training meant his body had not a single ounce of excess fat. Beneath the smooth lines of his muscles lay incredible explosive power. Fina's cheeks instantly flushed a deep red. In the heavens, she was a famous shut-in goddess. Forget men, she didn't even know more than a handful of other deities in total. Seeing a male body from such close proximity was a first for her. She hurriedly averted her eyes, her heart racing uncontrollably. Cough, why you, lie face down on the bed. She commanded, feigning composure. Burning Feather did as he was told. Fina took a deep breath. From the tools a deity always carried, she pulled out a silver needle even thinner than a sewing needle. She looked at her own fair, tender finger, hesitating for a long time before closing her eyes, steeling herself, and giving it a light prick. Hiss. A tiny, negligible sting followed, immediately causing the Hydro-Archon's face to crumple in distress. The thought that she would have to go through this bloodletting ritual every time she updated a familia member's status or added a new member made her want to cry. A drop of blood shimmering with a faint blue light seeped from her fingertip, emitting a holy and pure aura. Fina didn't dare delay. She dabbed the drop of divine blood onto Burning Feather's broad back, then extended her finger to begin writing the contract to the extraordinary in hieroglyphs. Knowledge of the favor was an instinct that almost all deities automatically mastered upon descending to the lower world. Something wonderful happened. In the past, no matter which deity's blood it was, the moment it touched Burning Feather's skin, it would be repelled by an invisible force, as if they were as incompatible as fire and water. But this time, Fina's divine blood was like a traveler returning home, merging into his body gently and without any resistance. As Fina's fingertip traced elegantly across Burning Feather's back, complex and ancient hieroglyphs lit up one by one, eventually converging into an exquisite pattern, a scale symbolizing justice, intertwined with a teardrop representing water, emitting a soft blue glow. It worked. The favor was successfully carved. Immediately following, more sacred script appeared below the pattern, recording everything about Burning Feather at this moment in detail. Wow! Looking at the script, Fina couldn't help but let out a surprised exclamation of praise. She leaned in closer, her beautiful heterochromatic eyes rounding in astonishment. So amazing. Burning Feather, you're amazing. She shouted excitedly. Although I don't quite understand the specific meaning of these values, look. You were born with a developmental ability, 3 skills, and 1 magic. And there are 2 blank magic slots. I've heard that this is a very, very rare talent. She danced with joy, as if she were the one who had obtained this talent. Then, remembering her task, she quickly took out a blank sheet of parchment and transcribed the sacred script from Burning Feather's back, converting it into the common tongue of the lower world before handing it to him. Having done all this, she tapped Burning Feather's back lightly and whispered something. The glowing favor pattern slowly faded and disappeared from view. This was a protection deities provided to familia members called locking. Unless an expensive, unlocking potion was used, only Fina herself could make his status reappear and update it. Burning Feather took the parchment, which still carried a lingering warmth. He took a deep breath and fixed his gaze upon it. 14 years of waiting, 6 years of bitter cultivation, all the answers would be revealed at this moment. Name: Burning Feather. Race: Human. Level: LV.1. Strength: I0 endurance, I0 dexterity, I0 agility, I0 magic, I0 developmental ability. Abnormal resistance, S affected by skill descenders, naturally possesses the highest rank resistance. Magic. Ripples of the past. Memory magic, short chant. Effect. Deeply reads one's own memories to replicate magic used by the most unforgettable person. Chant. In the depths of my heart's lake, rise ripples of the past. Currently reproducible magic is as follows. Demon King Varian. Super short chant, sound magic. Chant. Gospel. Garden of Silence. Super short chant, enchantment magic. Chant. Peace of soul. Extinction Annunciation Prayer. Super long chant, wide range annihilation magic. Chant. The root of blessed woe, the hatred of birth, devouring half my body is my original sin. Unpurifiable, unclean sable, irredeemable, the sound echoing through the heavens is my transgression. The trumpet of the gods, the harp of the spirits, the melody of light, these are the brands of sin. Oh, my fate, loved by the artificial heavens and earth, shatter into ash. I loathe thee so. The price is here, with the evidence of sin, destroy all things. Lament, Holy Bell Tower. Skills. Descenders. As a soul from outside the world, the essence of its existence is not bound by the common sense of this world. Effect. Absolute resistance to mental interference effects, including but not limited to charm, curse, fear, confusion, brainwashing, etc., immunity to all forms of mental pollution. Additional effect. Naturally possesses the highest rank, S, abnormal resistance developmental ability. Stel. As a seeker of the unknown, one gains growth speed beyond common sense when stepping into new domains. Effect. Experience gain is significantly increased when first entering a new dungeon floor, unexplored secret realm, or facing a monster species never encountered before. The effect diminishes as familiarity increases. The Gazed Abyss. The fluctuations of an otherworldly soul act like a lighthouse in the dark, continuously attracting the malice and curiosity of the dungeon. Effect. Targeted gestation. Within the dungeon, there is a probability of inducing the dungeon to absorb memory information and generate special monsters that do not exist in the current world's lineage. These monsters provide extremely high experience points and rare materials when killed. Burning Feather's fingers lightly brushed over the familiar magic names on the parchment. His gaze lingered on that thin sheet of parchment for a long time. His fingertips unconsciously stroked the line, ripples of the past, feeling the slight indentations left by the sacred letters on the parchment. Alpea's 3 spells, like 3 indelible brands, were deeply engraved into his soul. A bitter smile quietly bloomed at the corner of his mouth. This was probably what they call a white moonlight. It was precisely because she was unreachable, and because he had watched her walk toward destruction while being powerless to stop it, that this yearning and resentment were so unforgettable, eventually planting a seed in his soul that bloomed into the flower called magic. He hadn't expected that his almost paranoid obsession with Alpea would become the source of his power in this way. He suppressed these complex emotions deep in his heart, moved his gaze down, and calmly analyzed his skills. Descenders, this was the proof of his identity as a visitor from another world, granting him absolute mental resistance. In this world where gods walked everywhere and various mental magics and curses appeared endlessly, this was undoubtedly a top-tier life-saving trump card. Still, this skill solved his urgent need even more. He didn't have time to level up slowly and step by step. The time the black dragon left him was running out. This skill was his weapon for chasing time, a guarantee to prevent himself from ending up as just a powerless observer. Finally, there was the Gazed Abyss. Looking at this permanent passive skill that couldn't be turned off, Burning Feather's brow furrowed slightly. He had some faint guesses in his heart. Skills were not always beneficial. Just like Alpea, her cursed talent eventually turned into a skill. While granting her power, it also accelerated the withering of her life like a maggot on a bone. His third skill was likely also a double-edged sword. It could bring him huge gains, but descriptions like, attracting the malice and curiosity of the dungeon, and, inducing the generation of special monsters, all foretold dangers far beyond the norm. This meant his path of adventure was destined not to be smooth from the very beginning. After thinking for a moment, Burning Feather solemnly folded the parchment and put it in his breast pocket. His gaze finally fell on the long silent system panel. In the center of the panel, a pink and blue orb of light, like a dreamy nebula, was slowly rotating, emitting an alluring glow. That was the entangled fate. 14 years of waiting was all for this moment. Burning Feather reached out his finger, pausing slightly just before touching the light orb. He took a deep breath and then, with an almost pious attitude, clicked on it. The light orb shattered, turning into brilliant specks of light dancing across the sky, instantly disappearing into the system interface. Immediately after, at the top of the interface, a shooting star representing a summons streaked across the virtual night sky. The trajectory of that light, after flying for a moment, began to change color rapidly, from ordinary blue to dazzling purple, and finally, in a burst of radiant splendor, it completely transformed into a blinding gold, symbolizing the highest rarity. Whoa. What happened? What's going on? In reality, in the originally peaceful small wooden cabin, a huge golden magic circle unfolded on the floor without warning. The intricate patterns were shimmering with light, illuminating the entire room in golden splendor. This sudden change gave Fina, who was still curiously looking around, a big fright, making her jump. It's fine. Burning Feather's voice was exceptionally calm, but his blue eyes, staring fixedly at the center of the magic circle and even forgetting to blink, completely betrayed the excitement and anticipation in his heart. It's just a single pull win. Who would it be? Who would it be, responding to my summons and crossing the barriers of worlds? Along with the expansion of the golden light, an ethereal and beautiful singing voice faintly echoed in their ears. That singing was not like a sound from the mortal world. It seemed to come from a distant sea of stars, pure and melodious, carrying a wonderful power that soothed the heart. When the light reached its peak and then slowly receded like a tide, a young girl stood quietly in the center of the magic circle. She wore a gorgeously designed gray-purple dress, with a high-low hemline that looked like blooming petals. Soft, light purple long curly hair cascaded behind her, with a few strands hanging over her chest. She had lake-green eyes, as clear as a jade pool in the forest, currently carrying a hint of confusion from just arriving in a different world. The moment he saw the girl's face, Burning Feather's heart skipped a beat. That iconic hair color, that angelic face, and those singing voices that echoed through the galaxy in his memory. Chicken Wing Girl, no, it was that superstar who shone brilliantly on the stage of Penacony, the galactic songstress, Robin. The confusion in Robin's eyes lasted only for a brief moment before being replaced by clarity. Clearly, the system had already instilled the basic information of this world and the reason for her summons into her consciousness. She looked up, her gaze sweeping over Fina and Burning Feather, finally landing on Burning Feather. She lifted her skirt and bowed slightly to the two of them, performing an impeccable lady's curtsy. Her movements were elegant and composed, every detail revealing good breeding and noble temperament. Nice to meet you. I am Robin, summoned here by your grace. Please look after me from now on. Her voice was just as beautiful as the singing they had heard earlier. Welcome, Miss Robin. Burning Feather forcibly suppressed the grin that was about to reach his ears, trying to make himself look more composed. But the excited light flashing in those blue eyes could not be hidden. This was Robin, the top idol who conquered the entire universe with her singing. Who would have thought that his first formal summons would welcome such a heavyweight presence? Ahem. Beside him, Fina cleared her throat. Not to be outdone, she puffed out her chest and put on the airs of a great deity. Hello, Robin. I am Fina, the goddess who presides over the water and justice of this world. She specifically emphasized the word, goddess. So it is Lady Goddess, please excuse my lack of manners. Hearing this, a hint of appropriate surprise appeared on Robin's face, and she then smiled and very cooperatively bowed once more. Her reaction was flawless, showing respect for the deity without being sycophantic. No need to be so polite. From now on, we're family, all on the same side. Seeing Robin being so sensible, Fina felt a bit embarrassed instead, feeling as if her little schemes were all seen through. She hurriedly stepped forward to support Robin, preventing her from continuing to bow. After a brief introduction, Burning Feather explained the importance of the favor. So, to have the power to protect yourself and fight in this world, you need Fina to carve a favor for you and become a member of our Loki Familia. Robin listened quietly and nodded understandingly. I understand. Then, I'll leave it to Lady Fina. I'll step out for a moment. Burning Feather spoke tactfully. After all, Carving the favor required exposing one's entire back. He turned and walked out of the wooden house, leaving the space to the two girls. Before long, Furina's call came from inside the house. Burning Feather pushed the door open and entered, seeing that Robin had already tidied her dress and was standing to the side with a smile. Furina, on the other hand, was excitedly waving a piece of parchment at him. How is it? Burning Feather asked curiously. See for yourself, it's simply incredible. Furina stuffed the parchment into Burning Feather's hand. Burning Feather didn't stand on ceremony. Although a familia member's status values are private, as the captain of this fledgling familia, he had to have a clear understanding of every member's potential and abilities. He believed that someone as intelligent as Robin would surely understand this as well. He unfurled the parchment, his eyes quickly scanning the contents. Name: Robin. Race: human. Level: LV.1. Basic status: Strength, I0, Endurance, I0, Dexterity, I0, Agility, I0, Magic, I0. Magic. Fluttering Wing White Sound. Type: Sound Magic Ultra Short Chant. Effect: Stimulates magic through minimal syllables to release a sharp, high-penetration directional sonic shockwave, like the flapping of a bird's wings. Chant: Resonate. Fugue of the Stars. Type: Tier Ascension Magic Long Chant. Effect: Consumes a large amount of the user's magic to perform rank sublimation on designated allies, including self. Sublimation effect: Grants a massive boost to all basic status values, strength, endurance, dexterity, agility, magic, for a short duration, equivalent to a temporary increase of 1 adventurer level LV. Targets and duration are determined by the user's magic and mental strength. Chant: Listen to this stellar movement weaving destiny. Use the melody as a ladder to transcend the barriers of mortality. Now, join me in the firmament, fugue of the stars. Skills: Drunken Prelude. Effect: When activating magic, restores a portion of the magic and mental strength consumed by that magic. Tonal Unison. Effect: When fighting alongside allies, creates a mysterious, destiny resonance. Increases the efficiency of experience points gained from battle for oneself and all allies. The effect grows with the number of allies and team coordination. The more people and the better the cooperation, the higher the bonus. After reading Robin's status sheet, a flash of realization crossed Burning Feather's eyes. It was just as he had expected. 2 spells and 2 skills, this initial configuration could already be described as luxurious. But what was truly astonishing were the effects of these spells and skills. Fugue of the Stars was actually a tier ascension magic, of the same type as the Uchide no Kozuchi, magic used by one of the original story's 3 major cheaters, that lewd fox. This meant that as long as Robin grew, she alone could raise the entire team's combat power by a whole tier. And the skill Tonal Unison was a perfect team growth accelerator. Coupled with the offensive magic Fluttering Wing White Sound for self-protection and Drunken Prelude to ensure sustainability, Robin was simply a perfect support who could both fight and assist, while also providing a team experience buff. As a teammate, she couldn't be any better. At the same time, Burning Feather completely confirmed his previous suspicion. Characters summoned by the system do not bring the powers from their original worlds. They are like characters in a gacha game, whether they were a world-destroying demon king or a world-saving hero in their original plot. Once they enter the pool and are summoned, they must start from the most basic LV.1. Robin was no exception. In her own world, she was a pathstrider of harmony, possessing power beyond mortal imagination. But coming to this world, everything returned to zero, and she was completely wiped clean into a blank slate. However, while the power was gone, that unique potential was preserved intact. This was precisely why she could have such a luxurious configuration of skills and magic from the very beginning. A super support with infinite potential was now in place. Night fell, and the bustle of the northern village had long since faded, leaving only the sound of the wind whispering under the eaves. Because the wooden house only had 2 rooms, the living arrangements for the 3 of them became an issue. Ultimately, under Burning Feather's arrangement, Alpea's room was temporarily assigned to Furina and Robin. Wow, this room is so big and clean. As soon as Furina entered, she looked around curiously. She bounced on the edge of the large bed, finding it quite novel. Robin didn't speak, she just stood quietly in the center of the room, her sea green eyes surveying the surroundings. She could tell that this room hadn't been lived in for a long time, but it was kept very clean. She also noticed the flash of complex emotion deep in Burning Feather's eyes when he made the arrangements. The clever songstress didn't ask questions, she simply smiled and bid Burning Feather good night, thoughtfully closing the door. The next day, just as dawn was breaking and a sliver of light was peeking over the horizon. When Robin quietly got up, intending to do her part for the newly joined familia by taking the initiative to prepare breakfast, a faint sound and the aroma of food were already coming from the kitchen. She walked over and saw Burning Feather busily working in front of the hearth with practiced ease. He placed sliced bacon into the pan, the fat was rendered out by the heat, making a sizzling sound as a rich meaty aroma instantly filled the air. In a pot on the other side, wheat porridge was bubbling with steam. He did it so naturally, as if countless mornings over the past 6 years had started alone like this. Standing at the doorway, Robin felt a surge of inexplicable emotion. There was surprise, approval, and a hint of heartache that even she didn't notice. She subconsciously felt a bit of shame. Letting a boy younger than herself prepare breakfast for her made her feel somewhat uneasy. Good morning, Burning Feather. Do you need any help? She asked softly. Good morning, Robin. Burning Feather turned back, a slight smile on his face. No need, it'll be ready soon. You and Fina should go wash up first. Just as he finished speaking, Fina wandered out of the room rubbing her eyes and yawning. She had been accurately navigated there by the aroma of food. With sleepy eyes, she asked, It smells so good. Burning Feather, what tasty thing are we eating this morning? For this carefree goddess, there clearly weren't that many complex thoughts. Having something delicious to eat was enough to make her happy all day. A simple breakfast, yet it carried a long-lost warmth. The three of them sat around a small wooden table, the morning light outside the window coating everything in a layer of warm gold. After eating breakfast, Burning Feather put down his utensils, his expression turning serious. Fina, Robin, I plan to set off in the next few days for the labyrinth city, Orario. Fina was using a spoon to scrape the last bit of oatmeal from her bowl. Hearing this, she nodded vigorously. Great, great. Orario, I've wanted to see it for a long time. Let's head out quickly. Robin, after a brief moment of thought, expressed her agreement. I have no objections. To active as an adventurer, Orario is indeed the only choice. Burning Feather nodded and continued. Although there are monsters everywhere in this world and hunting outside can also gain experience points, after thousands of years of development, the ecology of the outside world has long since stabilized. The strength and quantity of monsters are far from comparable to the dungeon. Similarly, familias that operate in the outside world for a long time are generally weaker than those stationed in Orario. We don't have time to accumulate slowly. If we go, we must go to the stage at the very center of the world. His goal, from the very beginning, was not to become an ordinary adventurer. What he wanted to chase was the height Alpea once reached, and even surpass her. For this, he had to choose the most efficient path. With the plan decided, Burning Feather immediately took action. He settled Fina and Robin and went out alone to find an old merchant who resided in the village. The merchant's name was Bolo, a stout middle-aged man who was enthusiastic and had a quite good relationship with Burning Feather. In these past 6 years, he had often looked after Burning Feather, who lived alone. Uncle Bolo, I'd like to ask you for a favor. Burning Feather got straight to the point. I want to find a reliable merchant caravan to hitch a ride to Orario. To Orario. Uncle Bolo was somewhat surprised, but then nodded understandingly. True, you've grown up, child, it's time to go out and make your way. It's just, that road isn't easy to travel. He took a puff from his pipe and said with a solemn expression. This is the far north, more than 1,000 miles from Orario. Even on the fastest wyvern, it would take 10 days to half a month. If you take a carriage, it'll take even longer. Along the way, there are ice fields, snowy mountains, forests swarming with bandits, the dangers are not few at all. Burning Feather's expression was equally serious. I understand, which is why I need a sufficiently strong merchant caravan to travel with. What he didn't say was that his biggest concern right now was not himself. Fina is a goddess from the lower world. Even if those outlaws were incredibly bold, they wouldn't dare to openly move against a god. But Robin was different. She was not a goddess, yet she possessed a peerless beauty sufficient to make even gods take notice. In this land that was not yet fully civilized, beauty was sometimes not a blessing, but an original sin. This world was essentially still a feudal kingdom society, and in certain gray areas beyond the reach of the law, even a barbaric slave system was preserved. Burning Feather did not dare to underestimate the potential malice in the hearts of this world's natives. Once Robin was exposed to the eyes of those greedy bandits or nobles, she wouldn't be a living person, but a walking commodity that could be sold for an astronomical price. To ensure nothing went wrong, finding a merchant caravan with guards to travel with was the only choice. All right, leave this to me. Uncle Bolo patted his chest and promised, then turned and left in a hurry to scout for information. Not long after, Uncle Bolo ran back with an excited face. Before he even arrived, his voice reached them. Burning Feather, you kids' luck is truly through the roof. He ran up to Burning Feather, panting, and said excitedly. The Artemis Familia, the Familia of the moon goddess Artemis. They happened to be performing a hunting mission near Dragon Valley a while ago, and they're preparing to rest for a couple of days before setting off back to Orario. I've already used my connections to ask. They're willing to accept employment and give you a lift. Artemis Familia. Burning Feather's heart stirred slightly. He naturally knew this name. A familia with the moon goddess Artemis, who presided over chastity and hunting, as its primary deity. Although the familia members numbered only 20 and were all female, the Captain Litsa was an experienced LV.3 adventurer, and there were several LV.2 elites in the group. Such a force might not be top tier in Orario, but in the outside world, it was definitely a powerful armed force capable of moving without restraint. More importantly, the Artemis Familia was famous for its strict discipline and outstanding reputation. With them escorting, safety concerns were almost non-existent. Burning Feather hadn't expected his luck to be so good as to encounter this hunting familia. But on second thought, the Artemis Familia was an exploration and hunting type familia. They didn't like staying in Orario and spent the whole year traveling outside, hunting powerful monsters and completing various high-difficulty missions issued by the guild. Appearing near Dragon Valley was actually quite reasonable. It'll be them. Burning Feather decided immediately. He returned to the wooden house and, from a hidden compartment under the bed, took out a heavy leather bag. This was the money Alpea had left for him 6 years ago. She hoped he could take this money to a prosperous city and live a stable life like an ordinary person. But he hadn't. He chose to stay in this place closest to her last footprints, stubbornly waiting. In these 6 years, he relied on doing odd jobs for the villagers in exchange for food and had almost never touched this money. Now, these currency, carrying complex emotions, finally had their use. Burning Feather handed a substantial bag of currency to Uncle Bolo and said solemnly, Uncle, this is the deposit for the employment. I'll leave the rest of the arrangements to you. Using this money to start the first step of chasing her. The rest would serve as the initial startup funds for the Foculars Familia. Another morning dawned in the north. The sky was dimly lit, and the air still carried the chill of the night. Burning Feather packed his last piece of luggage, a simple knapsack containing a few changes of clothes and some dry rations. He led Fina and Robin out of the wooden house for the last time. As his hand was about to close the familiar wooden door, his movement couldn't help but pause. His gaze passed through the crack in the door, taking one last look inside the house. That empty wooden table, those 2 chairs that would never be sat in at the same time again, 14 years of time and 2 lifetimes of memories seemed to be concentrated in this small space. He knew that once this door closed, he likely would never return. This was the starting point of his bond with Alpea, and his future would be in far-off Orario. You'll be back. A gentle voice sounded beside Burning Feather. At some point, Robin had put on a large black hooded cloak, completely concealing her breathtaking face and pale purple hair. Beneath the shadow of the hood, her lake green eyes remained as clear as ever, as if they could see through one's heart. She sensed the complexity and reluctance in Burning Feather's eyes. Burning Feather remained silent for a moment before slowly shaking his head, a relieved smile playing on his lips. Thank you, Robin, but it's all right. He gently closed the door. The click of the lock sounded like a farewell to the past. I will keep moving forward, never looking back, until I achieve my goal. Of course. Fina's energetic voice broke the silence. Unlike Robin, she didn't need to hide. Her status as a deity was her best protection. Puffing out her small chest and placing her hands on her hips, she announced in a grand tone, "We will keep moving forward. Focolars Familia, let's move out." Seeing her lively, youthful appearance, seemingly full of infinite longing for the future, Burning Feather and Robin shared a smile. The gloom and sadness of leaving home were instantly dispelled without a trace. Indeed, he was no longer alone. As the three of them walked toward the village entrance, familiar villagers stepped out of their homes along the way. "Burning Feather, are you leaving? Take care on the road. This child is finally heading out into the world. Here, I made this jerky myself, take it for the journey. Take this, kid. It's a waterskin I used during my adventuring days, it's sturdy and durable." The blacksmith, the grocery store auntie, the old hunter, familiar faces, simple well wishes, and gifts that weren't necessarily valuable but were full of heart. Burning Feather had a very good reputation in this village. Over the past 6 years, though he was a person of few words, he always lent a hand whenever someone needed help. Repairing roofs, carrying heavy loads, driving away wild beasts, he never asked for anything in return. The villagers had watched this precocious and strong child grow up, holding him dear in their hearts. Now, his departure had brought out nearly half the village to see him off. At the village entrance, Burning Feather finally met their escorts for the journey, the Artemis Familia. 20 female adventurers, clad in practical leather armor and carrying bows or short swords, were quietly preparing the carriages. Their movements were efficient and coordinated, exuding the sharp aura of seasoned veterans. Standing at the front of the group was a breathtakingly beautiful goddess. She had long blue hair that flowed like moonlight, and her green eyes were pure and free of any impurities. Her posture was dignified and her aura cool. She was none other than the moon goddess, Artemis. The moment she saw Fina, a ripple appeared in Artemis's calm green eyes, and a slight smile touched her lips. "It really is you, Focolars. That divine light descending to the lower realm a few days ago was yours, wasn't it? I never expected you'd choose such a remote place." Fina tilted her head, recalling for a moment as vague memories of meeting in the heavens surfaced in her mind. She immediately mimicked the tone of the divine, Focolars, from her memories, nodding with reserved elegance. "Artemis, long time no see. I'll be in your care for this journey. Having accepted the quest and received payment, I will naturally do my best." Artemis nodded back. Her attitude was professional, yet not distant. Then, her gaze turned to Burning Feather and Robin as she asked curiously, "Are they your familia members? You've only just descended, yet you've acted quite fast. Hee, impressive, right? I am a goddess, after all." Upon being praised, Fina instantly lost her composure, reverting to the easily boastful little girl as she proudly puffed out her chest. "You've changed too." Artemis looked at her with a complicated expression. The lower realm was like a giant melting pot. Even the purest deity would change from living day and night with their children. Only she seemed to remain exactly the same as always. "Lady Artemis, it's time to depart." Just then, a girl with short, practical red hair approached and respectfully reminded her. She was the captain of the Artemis Familia, a level 3 adventurer named Litsa. "I understand, Litsa. Prepare to set out." Artemis nodded and then invited Fina to share a carriage with her. Meanwhile, Burning Feather and Robin were assigned to a separate, slightly smaller carriage. In the presence of their primary goddess, the members of the Artemis Familia instinctively kept their distance from Burning Feather. The rule, no contact with males, was already etched into their very bones. But those curious gazes were like unhideable sparks, occasionally flickering over him. After all, this white-haired, blue-eyed youth was handsome and had a calm demeanor, not at all inferior to certain gods in the heavens known for their looks. The convoy slowly started, embarking on the long journey to Orario. Once the carriage had left the village area and the surroundings were confirmed safe, Robin finally took off her black hood. Her silky, pale purple hair cascaded down like a waterfall, and her flawless face blossomed within the carriage, instantly catching the attention of several nearby Artemis Familia members. Without the concern of no contact with males, the girl's natural dispositions soon showed. Coupled with Robin's gentle smile and elegant speech, she quickly hit it off with them. "Focolars, you've found a wonderful child." Even Artemis couldn't help but praise softly from the other carriage. Hearing her child being praised, Fina was so happy she practically beamed with pride, humming a little tune. As they chatted, a half-elf girl named Lanty brought the topic around to Burning Feather. Robin introduced him with a smile. Burning Feather is our captain, a very reliable and trustworthy person. Captain. Lanty blinked her curious eyes. But there are only two of you in the Focolars Familia right now, right? So, are you two in a relationship? The question was so direct that even Robin, who was skilled at handling various situations, couldn't help but blush slightly, waving her hands in a hurry. No, no, we're just companions. It's only a matter of time. Lanty had an, I get it, look on her face and said enviously, a familia is family. If you want to find a lover in the future, Robin, you'll surely have to look within your own familia. As the only male member and the captain, Mr. Burning Feather is clearly the prime candidate. Robin found herself a bit overwhelmed by Lanty's blunt words and could only smile as she shifted the topic. It sounds like you're quite interested in romance, Lanty. Oh, of course. Lanty first took a cautious look back at the carriage where their primary goddess was, then lowered her voice and leaned in to whisper into Robin's ear. I really want to experience that kind of sweet romance. But as you know, our familia forbids romance. Lanty, if you wish to pursue romance, you may leave the familia, I will not stop you. A cold, clear voice reached everyone's ears with perfect clarity. As the goddess of the hunt, Artemis possessed 5 senses that far surpassed those of ordinary mortals, even without using her divine power. What Lanty thought was a whisper was no different from shouting in her ears. The atmosphere of the convoy instantly froze. Artemis felt a bit dejected in her heart. This was a child she had raised with her own hands, how did she turn out so wrong? She was becoming just like those deities in the heavens she despised most, the ones who indulged in love and passion. No, no, no. I wouldn't leave Lady Artemis even if I died. Lanty shook her head like a rattle, her attitude incredibly firm. She had been picked up from the mountains and forests by Artemis and raised since she was a child. To her, Artemis was both her primary goddess and her mother. I just don't understand. Perhaps it was long-held suppression bursting forth at this moment, but Lanty gathered her courage and asked loudly, Lady Artemis, why are you so taboo about romance? Hey, Lanty. The captain, Litsa, changed her expression upon hearing this and gave her a fierce glare. But Lanty did not back down. She pressed her hands together and pleaded with Artemis, please, tell me. I really want to know. Facing the child's eyes filled with confusion and longing, Artemis fell silent. For the first time, an obvious bewilderment appeared in her pure green eyes. I can only say, precisely because it is me, it is not allowed. She spoke slowly, her voice carrying a hint of a daze that even she hadn't noticed. I am the goddess who presides over chastity. My position is the exact opposite of the goddess who presides over beauty. If I were to acknowledge love, I would no longer be myself, would I? Like a child ignorant of the world, she was stating a truth that she herself might not even fully understand. Lady Artemis should also fall in love. Lanty, however, argued loudly. Romance is a very beautiful thing. I want Lady Artemis to know the wonder, joy, and warmth of romance too. She clenched her fists, her momentum like a rainbow. The girls around them looked at each other. From their initial surprise, the flames of support were now ignited in their eyes. That's right, Lady Artemis. For a girl, romance is truly wonderful. They spoke in unison. This sudden, romance promotion, meeting made the atmosphere of the convoy exceptionally heated. As an outsider, Burning Feather silently shrunk his neck inside his own carriage. He hadn't expected the topic to evolve like this at all. At this time, remaining silent was the only choice. On the other side, Fina looked completely stunned. Her heterochromatic blue eyes were wide and round as she watched everything in a daze. Faced with the unprecedented excitement of the familia's children, Artemis was thoroughly confused. She turned a pleading gaze toward her most trusted captain. Litsa, do you think so too? Being called upon, Litsa's face flushed red and white as she stammered, well. I suppose so. It is certain that we do change before and after falling in love. Having received the captain's affirmation, Artemis stopped speaking. She raised her head and looked up at the boundless sky, her pure green eyes filled with deep lostness. As night fell, the convoy chose to set up camp in a clearing at the edge of a forest near a water source. A bonfire was lit, dispelling the chill and darkness. After relieving himself far from the camp, Burning Feather was about to head back when he saw a blue figure standing alone by a gurgling stream. The moonlight was like water, spilling over her and making her look like an elf under the moon, holy and lonely. It was Artemis. And Artemis had clearly noticed him as well. Lady Artemis. Burning Feather stopped and gave a polite greeting. Your name is Burning Feather, right? Artemis turned around. Under the moonlight, her voice was even softer than during the day. Yes. Burning Feather nodded. Looking at her expression, which still seemed shrouded in mist, he asked tentatively. It's so late and you haven't rested yet. Is something on your mind? Moonlight filtered through the gaps in the forest branches, sprinkling broken silver onto the flowing stream water. The evening breeze brushed past, bringing the fresh scent of earth and grass, as well as a slight warmth from the distant camp's bonfire. Artemis stood quietly by the stream, the cold moonlight enveloping her, adding a hint of nighttime softness and bewilderment to her stern aura as a primary goddess. She looked at her blurred reflection in the water, as if examining a strange existence. Do you think, as an unchanging deity, I can experience change? She didn't turn back. Her voice was very light, as if talking to herself or asking the only listener behind her. Perhaps it was because Burning Feather was the only male in this small group, an existence completely contrary to her teachings. Or perhaps because he was a total outsider, a safe person to confide in, this goddess who had always presented herself as rigorous finally let down her guard. You can. Burning Feather's answer came without the slightest hesitation, firm and decisive. This affirmative reply caused Artemis to start slightly. She turned around, her pure green eyes full of doubt. Why? Because the one standing here now is the mortal Artemis, not the heavenly goddess Artemis. Burning Feather met her gaze, his tone sincere and calm. He knew that every word he spoke would be proven at some point in the future. When gods descend to the lower world, they are no longer high and mighty, eternally unchanging concepts. They have familias, they have children, and they have responsibilities and bonds. They will feel joy for their children's growth and sadness for their children's departure. They will be shaken by their children's wishes and changed by their experiences in the mortal world. Then, Artemis seemed touched by his words. She took a half step forward, the moonlight illuminating the confusion on her face. Do you also believe that romance is beautiful? I don't know. Burning Feather shook his head, his voice dropping low. That is an answer you need to find for yourself. The night cast a perfect shadow over Burning Feather's face, concealing the fleeting emotions in his eyes. For some, love is the most beautiful thing in the world, a light in the dark, hope in a desperate situation. But for others, it is the most painful poison, a bone-deep torture, an abyss of unrequited longing. These words caused Artemis to turn her body fully toward him. For the first time, she looked at the white-haired youth before her so seriously and without any prejudice. He wasn't old, yet those blue eyes held a depth of world weariness that didn't match his age. She could feel that he wasn't preaching, he was stating his own experiences. Are you, in a lot of pain? She moved a bit closer to him. Her divine intuition allowed her to keenly capture the hidden emotions in his words. Pain. Burning Feather chewed on the word before it finally dissolved into a bitter smile. I wouldn't call it that. It's just a lack of reconciliation. He lowered his eyes, looking at the reflection of himself and the goddess of the moon in the stream, and murmured to himself. Love is truly a complicated thing. Sorry, I dragged you into saying so many nonsensical things. Artemis sensed she might have touched upon a sore subject and spoke with some apology. It's fine. Burning Feather shook his head and looked up at her with a relieved smile. I am already flattered that Lady Artemis is willing to converse with me. He was telling the truth. This goddess was notoriously averse to men. Being able to talk to her calmly like this was already a huge honor. Don't say that. Artemis shook her head, her green eyes shimmering with an unprecedented curiosity. If it's possible, can you tell me about yourself? I want to understand more about love. Perhaps it was the impact of the children's words earlier that day, or perhaps it was the contradictory and deep aura of the youth before her, but this unchanging goddess was actively seeking to understand a field she had always resisted for the first time. Me. Burning Feather gave a self-deprecating laugh. There's actually not much to say. Just a paranoid person with an unrequited love. He looked up at the bright, clear moon in the night sky. Althea, could she ever like him? Impossible. In her eyes, he would always be just that little brat who needed her care. Was his feeling for her actually love, or just a refusal to let go? Was it a desire to protect her, or just pure possessiveness, unable to accept her sacrificing herself for others? He couldn't tell himself. After a long silence, Burning Feather finally spoke. In a tone so calm it was almost cold, he recounted the story of himself and Alpea. He omitted her name and identity, saying only that she was a benefactor who rescued him from a desperate situation and raised him for 8 years, a powerful, aloof woman who bore a curse and resolutely walked toward destruction. And, a youth who could only watch everything happen, powerless to stop it. Artemis listened quietly without interrupting. When Burning Feather finished, she did not offer comfort or sympathy like a mortal would. She didn't understand the bittersweet nature of love, but she understood God's. I'm sorry, I don't quite understand the emotions involved, so I can't comfort you. She spoke honestly, but it's precisely because of this obsession that the children of the lower world are so attractive to us, isn't it? Her green eyes sparkled in the moonlight, as if seeing through to some essence. We gods possess eternal lives, unchanging. While your lives are as brief as shooting stars, you can burn with a light more dazzling than the sun because of love, hate, and lack of reconciliation. Your stories, your struggles, and this obsession to change fate at any cost. This is exactly the miracle we eternal ones long to witness most. After chatting with Burning Feather for a while, Artemis seemed to have finally found a logic that could explain her children's behavior. She seemed to have let go of some heavy burden, and her entire being became much more relaxed. On the way back, the two walked side by side in silence. The atmosphere was no longer as heavy as when they came, instead, there was a strange harmony. However, when they passed through the forest path and returned to the brightly lit camp, this harmonious atmosphere was instantly shattered. Several Familia members who were picking up firewood by the campfire looked up and happened to see Artemis and Burning Feather walking out of the darkness together. Clatter. It was the sound of firewood falling to the ground. Then came a second sound, a third. Within a few seconds, the entire camp fell into an eerie silence. Everyone's movements froze. Eyes widened in disbelief as they looked at the man and woman standing side by side. That was Lady Artemis, the pure goddess who extremely disliked men. She actually came back together with a man from the woods outside the camp late at night. Artemis also noticed the awkward atmosphere. Feeling those 20 burning gazes mixed with shock, curiosity, and gossip, a blush rose across her usually cold, ice-like face at a visible speed. I'm going back first. She spoke hurriedly to Burning Feather and then, as if escaping, rushed back to her carriage, pulling the curtain shut heavily, with no further movement. The next moment, the camp exploded. Whoosh! Led by the Captain Litsa and the half-elf Lanti, several of the boldest girls rushed over like arrows from a bow, surrounding Burning Feather instantly so that not even water could leak through. Hey, you, how did you do it? Lanti's face was filled with excitement and agitation, completely forgetting the Familia's taboos as she almost pressed herself against Burning Feather. What did you talk about with Lady Artemis? Did she smile at you? Speak up. The girl's chattering sounded like 100 sparrows chirping in his ears. The scent of sweat mixed with fragrance from their bodies completely surrounded Burning Feather. He could even feel their rapid breathing from the excitement. Burning Feather was caught between laughter and tears by this display, backing away repeatedly only to find he had nowhere left to retreat. He could only cast a look for help toward Fina, who was nearby watching the show with her arms crossed. Ahem. Fina received the signal and immediately cleared her throat, marching over with a queenly stride. She forcefully pushed aside Lanti and Litsa who were at the front, spreading her arms to shield Burning Feather behind her like a protective mother bird, hands on her hips as she sternly scolded the crowd. What are you doing? Men and women should keep a proper distance, don't you know? Don't get so close to my child. Having been shouted at by another goddess, the girls finally calmed down and took a few steps back, though the excitement on their faces hadn't diminished in the slightest. They looked at their own primary deity hiding in the carriage, not daring to come out, and then at Burning Feather, who was being protected by Fina, exchanging knowing glances. This was incredible news. The goddess, she was starting to change. This was a good beginning. Maybe, in the future, they wouldn't have to leave the Familia to fall in love freely. As long as the goddess herself dated first, wouldn't the so-called Familia taboo crumble on its own? At this thought, their gazes focused on Burning Feather once more, looking at him as if he were a rare treasure. Lanty took the lead, pumping her fist hard at Burning Feather and lowering her voice to cheer him on. Keep it up, Mr. Captain. Hurry up and win over our goddess. Right, our happiness depends on you. We support you in spirit. Hearing these bold words, Burning Feather wanted to cry but had no tears. What was all this? He and Artemis didn't mean it that way at all. After tonight's commotion, he was certain that the pure moon goddess probably wouldn't have any contact with him again for a short while. The camp disturbance that night finally ended with Artemis locking herself in the carriage and Fina forcibly rescuing the surrounded Burning Feather. The result was exactly as Burning Feather expected. For the rest of the journey, Artemis never took the initiative to say a single word to him again. She returned to her usual cold and aloof self. During the day, she was either on horseback leading the way at the front of the convoy, or she stayed in her carriage, never even lifting the curtain. The more she acted this way, the more Lanty and the other girls of the Familia grew anxious, only able to frantically signal Burning Feather with their eyes in private, urging him to take the initiative. Burning Feather could only respond with a bitter smile. A deity's pride was far stronger than mortals could imagine. That night's social death scene had likely left a significant shadow in the moon goddess's heart. Approaching her now would only be counterproductive. Although communication had been cut off, it didn't stop Burning Feather from witnessing the power of this goddess of the hunt firsthand during the journey. After leaving the far north, monsters began to appear sporadically along the trade route. Once, while the convoy was passing through a dense forest, they encountered a lurking claw bear. It was a monster strong enough to give an ordinary level 1 adventurer party a hard fight. Just as Litsa drew her longsword and prepared to command her team to form a battle formation, a flash of silver light vanished in an instant from the primary deity's carriage. Poochie. The faint sound of an arrow entering flesh rang out. The claw bear, which had just roared and charged out of the bushes, suddenly stiffened its massive body and then crashed to the ground. A simple, unadorned arrow had accurately entered through its open mouth as it roared, piercing through its brain. A kill with a single arrow. Hardly anyone in the convoy even saw how Artemis had made her move. As long as I draw my bow, there is no target I cannot hit. Previously, during a casual chat, Artemis had said this to Fina. Only now did Burning Feather truly understand the weight of those words. It wasn't arrogance, but a statement of fact. This was archery at the divine realm level. Even if she lost her divine power and her physical attributes were suppressed by divine laws to be no different from a mortal's, the technique steeped in her soul would never disappear. In terms of pure combat power, Artemis, with a normal human's physical attributes, was even stronger than the Familia's captain, the level 3 Litsa. She was truly the undisputed strongest combatant of the Artemis Familia. This point was completely different from most other primary deities who served as symbols and did not participate in combat. The deities of the lower world each possessed vastly different authorities. There were martial types like Artemis who came with divine realm level skills, and there were those like Hephaestus who excelled in smithing, Mahe who excelled in medicine, and Soma who excelled in brewing wine. In their respective fields of expertise, they all surpassed the limits that mortals could reach. Of course, there was also his own Fufu, who could sing, dance, rap, who had no special talents at all, a useless deity who was good for nothing except being cute and providing favor. During the first few days of the journey, Burning Feather also actively requested to participate in combat. Before becoming an adventurer, he had already undergone long-term training, and his physical attributes far exceeded those of ordinary people. After receiving favor, his various basic ability values had received a qualitative improvement. But the monsters outside were simply too weak. Most were level 1, their strength not much better than the goblins on the first floor of the dungeon, or even weaker. Burning Feather only needed one sword strike to easily cut them in two. The monsters dissipated into black ash, leaving behind pathetically small magic stones. Monsters of this level were meaningless for training. After all, they were traveling along a prosperous trade route. The powerful monsters along the way had long since been cleared out by generations of adventurers and guards. After a few times, Burning Feather completely lost interest. The long trek was tedious. However, perhaps because of that night's ice breaking, the girls of the Artemis Familia became much bolder than before. After confirming that their primary deity seemed to turn a blind eye to it, they became even more daring. A group of girls who had never had deep contact with males were like they had discovered a new continent, taking turns to find Burning Feather and curiously asking all sorts of questions about boys. From favorite foods and hated weather to combat techniques and future plans, and even some questions about the differences in thinking between men and women that were hard for Burning Feather to answer. At times, that excessive enthusiasm was even a bit too much for him to handle, and he could only frequently send distress signals to Robin. And Robin was always understanding enough to appear at the most critical moments. She would join the conversation with a smile, using her gentle yet measured words to skillfully steer the topic in a safer direction, or simply use the excuse that the captain needed rest to bail Burning Feather out. After several times, Burning Feather was immensely grateful to this clever and considerate companion. After one successful rescue, he said to Robin half jokingly and half seriously, "Miss Robin, from today on, you are the vice captain of our Focolars Familia." Hearing this, Robin's lake green eyes curved into beautiful crescents, and she readily accepted the appointment, even though the entire Focolars Familia only had 3 people, including the primary deity. In this way, after a month of travel and without encountering any unexpected delays, they finally arrived at the center of the world, the labyrinth city, Orario. When the convoy crested the last hill and the magnificent full view of the city was revealed to everyone for the first time, even Burning Feather, who was mentally prepared, couldn't help but catch his breath. It was a city of indescribable grandeur, with countless buildings of various styles lined up side by side, stretching all the way to the horizon. And in the very center of the city, a pure white giant tower, seemingly built by the gods themselves, pierced through the sea of clouds and reached straight into the sky. The Tower of Babel. It stood there silently, as if connecting heaven and earth, looking down upon the entire world. Seeing this miraculous structure with his own eyes for the first time, Burning Feather's mind was deeply captivated, and a surge of shock stirred in his chest. However, this shock was soon replaced by another deeper and more complex emotion. Within just a few seconds, the look in his eyes changed from wonder to profound depth. This is Orario. The place where Alpea finally arrived. And also the final stage where she ended her own life. Why the long face? Shouldn't you be smiling right now? You've arrived at Orario, the place every adventurer dreams of. A cool, clear voice rang out beside him. At some point, Artemis had come to his side. She ignored the suddenly fervent gazes of the girls in her familia, simply looking at him quietly. Yeah. Burning Feather snapped back from his complex emotions. He turned his head, looked into Artemis's pure green eyes, and a smile curled on his lips once more. I should be smiling. That's more like it. Seeing this, Artemis nodded with satisfaction, her tone carrying her characteristic sternness. What kind of adventurer is always dwelling on the past? With that, she turned and walked away, leaving behind a graceful silhouette. Beside them, Fina puffed out her cheeks with a bewildered look. She felt like her spotlight had been stolen again. She had clearly wanted to say something to encourage Burning Feather just now. On the other side, Robin also silently lowered the hand she had just half raised. Her intelligent eyes looked at Burning Feather, then at Artemis's receding figure, and finally, she just gave a gentle smile without saying anything. When the caravan finally reached the gates of Orario, they were met by a line so long the end was nowhere in sight. The clamor of voices washed over them like a tide, and all sorts of races that only appeared in fantasy works were now gathered here in the flesh. Haughty elves were impatiently straightening their elegant robes, bearded dwarves carrying massive battle axes were boasting loudly to their companions, and Palom, only half the size of normal humans but full of energy, as well as werewolves and dog people whose ears and tails couldn't be fully hidden. Among them were merchants laden with exotic goods from the outside world, seeking fortune. Some were young people with eyes sparkling with longing and anxiety, yearning to fulfill their dreams of becoming heroes in this city. All kinds of people, harboring various purposes, together formed this vivid tapestry leading to the center of the world. At the city gates, the ones responsible for maintaining order and guarding the entrance to this great metropolis were adventurers clad in light armor and wearing iconic elephant-shaped masks. They belonged to one of Orario's top familias, led by Ganesha, the elephant-headed god, the Ganesha Familia. This massive familia, rated S rank by the guild, boasted a staggering 11 level 5 level 1 adventurers and over 100 upper level adventurers of level 2 and above. Their total membership reached into the thousands. They were not only a major force in exploration but also worked closely with the guild to handle the security of all Orario, serving as the city police in all but name. Although the Artemis Familia spent most of the year away, they were quite famous in Orario, so the guards allowed them through after a simple identity check. As for the newcomers of the Focolars Familia, they needed to undergo a simple registration of information. This was only a temporary record. For formal Familia registration, they would need to visit the Adventurer Guild in person later. As the three of them stepped through the city gates together, the atmosphere of extreme prosperity rushed to meet them. The wide stone-paved streets were bustling with traffic, and the shops on both sides were filled with a dazzling array of goods. In the windows of many shops, exquisite products made from magic stones were on display, street lamps that lit up on their own, bathing devices that automatically adjusted water temperature, and various decorations infused with faint magical power. These high-value items, which were hard to come by even for a fortune outside, seemed like ordinary commodities here. On the streets, adventurers wearing all kinds of equipment could be seen everywhere. Some walked out of taverns in groups of 3 or 5, laughing loudly about yesterday's gains, while others hurried toward the dungeon entrance, their eyes burning with a thirst for battle. Elves with carved longbows, dwarves with war hammers on their shoulders, humans with sharp longswords at their waists. Although he had been in this world for a long time, this sight, which could only be seen in fantasy movies, still opened Burning Feather's eyes and filled his heart with an indescribable excitement. The commission was successfully completed, and the escort mission of the Artemis Familia also came to an end. The moment of parting had finally arrived. Ah, Sister Robin, Lady Fina, you must come visit us if you have the chance in the future. Lanty held Robin's hand, her eyes red, her face full of reluctance. The other girls of the Familia also gathered around to bid a fond farewell to the new friends they had made during this journey. Especially toward Burning Feather, their eyes were filled with the resentment of disappointment in one's failure to live up to expectations. Lanty even puffed out her cheeks and complained in a voice that wasn't too quiet, "It's been a month already, Mr. Burning Feather, you're too useless. You haven't made any progress at all." PFF'd. Burning Feather felt as if he had been struck by an arrow, and his face instantly darkened. Standing to the side, Artemis's cool, beautiful face also darkened, and a dangerous aura emanated from her. Realizing their goddess was truly angry, the girls stuck out their tongues one after another and shrunk their necks, trying to get away with it by acting cute. Artemis ignored them and looked at Fina, her stern gaze softening considerably. "Since this is your first time in Orario, if you have any difficulties, you can come find me. Our Familia will be staying in Orario for a while." As she spoke, she handed Burning Feather a slip of paper with the address of their temporary residence. Before leaving, Artemis seemed to remember something else. She hesitated for a moment and added, "If you can't find a suitable place to stay for the time being, we have extra rooms at our place, enough for the 3 of you to live." Artemis. Hearing this, Fina was moved beyond words and gave her a big hug. "You're so thoughtful. I really regret not interacting with you more back in the heavens." When Fina hugged her like this, Artemis's body noticeably stiffened, but in the end, she did not push her away. Burning Feather also expressed his sincere gratitude for Artemis's kindness, but he still politely declined the invitation to stay. "Thank you very much for your kindness, Lady Artemis. However, I had already made preparations before coming, so I won't trouble you." Hearing this, Lanty, standing to the side, almost jumped up in agitation. She still wanted to make one last effort to create an opportunity for her goddess and Burning Feather. But this clueless fellow actually refused the goddess's active invitation. If they missed this chance, who knew when they would return to Orario again? However, in front of Artemis, Lanty didn't dare to be too blatant. She could only walk to the side in frustration, kicking small stones on the ground with the tip of her foot, one after another. Of course, Burning Feather was perfectly clear about Lanty's little schemes. But he wasn't that naive. Goddesses can be pursued, but Artemis is different. The difficulty of winning her over is not on a conventional level at all. Don't be fooled by how, in the original Works movie, she was practically handed to Belle on a silver platter. That was because she had experienced the tragic loss of her familia, the gruesome deaths of all her children, and even her own devouring by a monster. It was under such immense trauma that she underwent a fundamental change, deciding to follow her own heart and her children's final wish to experience love. But now, none of that has happened yet. The Artemis before them, although her heart had begun to soften due to the conflict with her children and his guidance, was still worlds away from the goddess willing to dedicate everything for love. Forcing closeness now would only trigger her divine instinct as a virgin goddess, pushing her further and further away. After bidding farewell to the reluctant Artemis Familia, Burning Feather and his two companions, holding the map of Orario kindly gifted by Artemis, headed towards the back half of the old district in the city's 7th sector, Adventurer Street. Their next goal was clear, the Adventurers Guild. Only by completing the formal Familia registration there would they, the Focolars Familia, truly have a place of their own in this labyrinthine city. The vastness of Orario far exceeded Burning Feather's imagination. This circular city centered around the Tower of Babel was clearly divided into 8 fan-shaped sectors by 8 main thoroughfares, each with distinctly different appearances and functions. They were currently walking along the border between the 6th and 7th sectors. On one side was the hustle, bustle, and vitality emanating from the commerce district, while on the other was the tranquility and antiquity preserved in the old residential district. The destination for Burning Feather's trio was precisely the headquarters of the Adventurers Guild located in the back half of the old district in the 7th sector, the Pantheon. As they ventured deeper, the surrounding scenery gradually changed. Tall commercial buildings were gradually replaced by aged stone houses. The commercial scent in the air faded, replaced by a smell mingling historical dust with the breath of daily life. Finally, a structure so magnificent it left one speechless appeared at the far end of their vision. It was a complex of pure white columnar architecture. Massive Doric stone pillars supported majestic halls. The overall style was solemn and sacred, as if not crafted by mortal hands but directly transplanted here from myth. This was the Pantheon, the heart of all adventurers in Orario. The moment they stepped into the Pantheon, a unique odor blending sweat, leather, metal, and dust assaulted their senses, followed by deafening clamor. The vast hall, spacious enough to hold thousands, was packed with people. Adventurers clad in various leather armor and wielding swords and blades gathered in small groups, loudly discussing their experiences in the dungeon. Supporters carrying huge backpacks taller than themselves shuffled through the crowd, searching for employers. There were also many young people, much like themselves, wearing expressions of confusion and longing, nervously looking around. This was the starting point of dreams and the end point of countless tragedies, a vortex where hope and despair intertwined. Burning Feather's gaze quickly swept across the hall, and he soon found the reception area following the signs. Behind a row of busy counters, his eyes immediately locked onto a figure. It was a half-elf girl wearing the guild uniform and glasses. Amid the surrounding noisy and chaotic environment, she was like a tranquil center, methodically handling business for the adventurer before her, a kind and professional smile always on her face. Her sweet features and lovely figure stood out distinctly even among the reception staff comprised entirely of beautiful girls. Burning Feather led Fina and Robin and walked straight over. "Hello, how may I assist you?" When it was their turn, the half-elf girl looked up, offering a flawless smile. Her gaze lingered on the three of them for a moment. The leading youth had white hair and blue eyes, handsome with a steady demeanor. The girl beside him was lively and spirited, radiating undeniable divinity. The last person had completely concealed themselves with a hood, appearing somewhat mysterious. "Hello, Miss Elf." As the leader, Burning Feather naturally took charge of the communication. "We are a familia from outside Orario and wish to formally register here." Although Robin was more skilled in such social interactions, it was not the right time for her to show her face. Burning Feather had never held a high opinion of the average quality among the adventurer community. This was a profession living on the edge, where desperados and those of poor character were commonplace. Before the Focolars Familia possessed sufficient self-defense capabilities, any factor that might invite trouble had to be avoided as much as possible. "I understand. Please follow me." The half-elf girl showed no surprise at this. She nodded and led the three away from the noisy hall towards the quieter administrative offices deeper inside the building. The person in charge of registration was a stern middle-aged man. The moment he saw Fina, he immediately stood up and bowed respectfully. Regardless of recognition, a god was a god. As a neutral organization like the Guild, the due respect must never be lacking. The registration process was swift. After verifying Furina's divine status, the Focolars Familia was officially recorded. Next came the Familia level assessment. 2 members, both adventurer level LV.1. According to Guild evaluation standards, the Focolars Familia's initial level is rank I. Hearing this lowest rank, Furina pouted in dissatisfaction, while Burning Feather and Robin remained calm. This was the expected result, they had anticipated it. After completing the Familia registration, the next step is the personal registration for the adventurers. The half-elf girl who had been quietly waiting nearby spoke up with a smile. According to regulations, the guild assigns a dedicated advisor to every newly registered adventurer. If you don't mind, I would like to serve as your advisor. Is that acceptable? She extended her hand to the 2 of them and introduced herself. My name is Aina Zul. Aina's kindness, consideration, and earnest, responsible attitude left a very positive impression on Burning Feather. He shook her hand and said with a smile. Then we'll be in your care, Miss Aina. Led by Aina, they arrived at a quiet, private reception room. Adventurer registration was simple, consisting of basic information like name, gender, race, and age. When it was Robin's turn, she removed her hood, revealing a breathtakingly beautiful face that could put all flowers to shame. Even the well-traveled Aina was visibly taken aback for a moment upon seeing Robin's appearance, a flash of amazement in her eyes. However, she quickly regained her professionalism and continued with the registration process. Robin listed her race as human. Although she was technically a Celestial Ring race member, after being summoned to this world, the distinctive celestial ring atop her head had disappeared. Judging by all her current characteristics, this world deemed her human. After completing all the registrations, Aina began to explain in detail all the various matters that novice adventurers needed to be aware of, from the basic structure of the dungeon to the types and habits of monsters in the upper levels, leaving nothing out. In short, before you have sufficient information and preparation, you absolutely must not rashly enter the dungeon. Remember, the thing adventurers should be most wary of is adventuring itself. Aina concluded seriously. The statement sounded very contradictory, but her meaning was, in a place like the dungeon, reckless, gambler-like advances only lead to death. To truly live long, one must be cautious, steady, and avoid gambling-style adventures as much as possible. Afterwards, if you encounter any trouble, you can always come to the guild to find me. Her genuine sense of responsibility and earnestness won the unanimous favor of Furina and Robin. With the registration handled, the next problem to solve was finding a place to live. When Aina learned they were planning to rent a place in the 7th district, she enthusiastically volunteered to take them to a landlord she knew. With a referral from an acquaintance, at least you don't have to worry about the landlord arbitrarily raising the price just because you're newcomers. That's what she said. With Aina's help, they soon rented a small 2-story building on a quiet street corner. Although somewhat old, the interior was very clean, fully furnished, and sufficient for the 3 of them to live in. To express their gratitude, Burning Feather wanted to treat Aina to a meal, but she declined with a smile. This is just part of my job. Standing at the doorway, she gave one final earnest warning. Mr. Burning Feather, Miss Robin, please promise me that before your first trip to the dungeon, you must come to me first. I will provide you with the most basic knowledge tutorial and the latest dungeon information. We promise. Burning Feather nodded seriously. Watching Aina's retreating figure, Robin couldn't help but remark, what a kind and responsible advisor. Aina is a good person. Furina also nodded vigorously. She held great favor for this half-elf who, from beginning to end, respectfully addressed her as Focolars the High Goddess. Night fell. The Focolars Familia finally had their first true home in Orario. On the first morning in their new Orario home, sunlight filtered through the not-so-clean windows, casting dappled spots of light on the wooden floor. After a simple breakfast, the air was filled with the aroma of bread. We need to go buy equipment. Burning Feather set down his cup, his tone calm. Robin nodded. There was not a trace of fear in her lake green eyes, only seriousness. Furina, meanwhile, was nibbling on a cake beside them, offering muffled words of encouragement between bites. The Hephaestus Familia, the most renowned forging familia in Orario and perhaps the entire world. Their shops were located on every corner of the city. The one Burning Feather and the others chose was a branch located in the 8th district. The shop's storefront was not large, and its decor was relatively plain, clearly targeting low-level adventurers with limited funds. Pushing the door open, a unique smell, a mix of metal, oil, and coolant, assailed their senses. The interior space was small. The walls were hung with all sorts of weapons and armor, long swords, short knives, battle axes, leather armor, chainmail, everything you could need. Although most were plainly crafted, each piece gleamed with a practical, cold light. Due to limited savings, Burning Feather's selection process was very pragmatic. For himself, he chose a one-handed longsword of perfect length and weight, and a set of lightweight leather armor for ease of movement. However, when selecting equipment for Robin, his criteria were completely different. In the end, he purchased for her a white ash wood staff with a cyan magic stone embedded at its tip. This staff wasn't high grade, but among similar equipment, it was considered fine quality. The shaft was smooth with good magical conductivity. Its price almost exceeded the total cost of Burning Feather's own entire set of equipment. Complete preparation allows one to respond to any situation. Looking at the bill, Burning Feather's heart remained unperturbed. After buying the equipment, they didn't delay for a moment and headed straight for the guild. When Aina saw the two of them appear before her fully armed, a heartfelt, relieved smile spread across her face. Excellent, you didn't ignore my advice. She led them into the familiar private consultation room. Many reckless newcomers always think the dungeon is child's play. They rush in without even proper equipment. Adventurers like you who put my mind at ease are truly rare. Amid her relief, she spread out a detailed map and began their final knowledge briefing. On dungeon floors 1 to 5, the main monsters are goblins and dungeon lizards. Their attack patterns are quite simple. But by the 6th floor, you'll encounter your first real test, war shadows. They are fast, adept at ambushes, and are widely recognized as newbie killers. Aina explained with utmost seriousness, listing all known dangers in the upper region one by one. Burning Feather listened quietly, committing every piece of this valuable information to memory. He certainly accepted Aina's goodwill, but in his heart, he understood better than anyone that what they were about to face would definitely not be limited to these standard answers from the data. That skill named the Gazed Abyss destined him and his familia to walk a unique, pioneering path. After bidding farewell to the repeatedly admonishing Aina, Burning Feather and Robin finally arrived at the very center of Orario, the magnificent white giant tower, the Tower of Babel. This was the entrance to the dungeon. The huge plaza at the tower's base was bustling with people. Adventurers were either forming parties or checking their equipment, the atmosphere tense yet orderly. At the entrance, several guild staff were responsible for verification. The process was very simple, they only needed to present their respective adventurer identification plates. Following the surging crowd, the two stepped inside the Tower of Babel. A spiral staircase, wide enough to accommodate thousands of people, led deep into the earth. This was the starting road, the dungeon's first layer, an absolutely safe zone where monsters never respawned. The air grew slightly cool and damp, and the light gradually dimmed. The moment they finished the long staircase and stepped onto the land of the first layer, a brand new world unfolded before their eyes. This was the first underground layer, a shallow cave system. The rocky ground was uneven. The glowing moss growing on the walls was the only light source, casting the entire space in a dim gloom. And it was at this very moment that Burning Feather felt a sudden, intense heat on his back. He knew that the Gazed Abyss had been triggered. Robin, be careful. Burning Feather warned in a low voice, his right hand already gripping the hilt of his sword, slowly drawing the long blade. Robin immediately understood and raised her staff. The magic stone at its tip glowed faintly, ready to cast a spell at any moment. They pressed forward. The surrounding adventurer parties gradually dispersed, and soon, no other figures remained in their line of sight. Suddenly, the rock wall to the side crumbled with a crash. A short, dark green-skinned goblin shrieked as it charged out, brandishing a rusted shortsword. Facing this most basic of foot soldiers, Burning Feather didn't even have the slightest emotional fluctuation. He stepped forward, his longsword tracing a crisp, clean silver arc that precisely sliced through the goblin's neck. Black blood splattered. The goblin let out a short, sharp scream before collapsing heavily to the ground. Then, with a poof, it turned into a cloud of black ash, leaving behind a fingernail-sized magic stone where it fell. Robin stepped forward, picked up the magic stone, examined it curiously for a moment, and then placed it into the backpack on her back. As they hadn't hired a supporter, the task of collecting loot was temporarily handled by her. Next, they successively dispatched several more goblins. Just as everything seemed to be proceeding routinely, the expected change finally occurred. The ground ahead suddenly shook and cracked. A monster that absolutely should not have appeared here emerged from beneath the earth. It was a spherical gelatinous creature about the size of a human head, its entire body fiery red. A fire slime. Burning Feather's pupils contracted slightly as he instantly recognized this monster from his distant memories. His gaze sharpened. Moving like lightning, his longsword left an afterimage in the air as it instantly slashed across the slime's body, drawing out a smear of crimson, viscous fluid. However, in the next moment, the eyes of both Burning Feather and Robin simultaneously narrowed. That slash, which was enough to cleave a goblin in two, had merely left a deep gash on the fire slime's body. And that gash was visibly wriggling and healing, restoring itself completely in less than 2 seconds. Immediately after, the fire slime's body contracted sharply and then shot up like a cannonball, slamming toward Burning Feather with a wave of scorching heat. Burning Feather sidestepped, narrowly dodging the impact, and followed up with a backhand slash, sending the fire slime flying back heavily. Burning Feather, your sword. Robin's cool voice suddenly rang out. Burning Feather looked down and only then realized that the blade of his steel longsword, the part that had struck the slime, had become red-hot and glowing as if it had been placed in a furnace. He glanced at the fire slime, which had once again fully recovered, and frowned tightly. Physical attacks were ineffective. Its body contained high temperatures, causing significant wear on weapons. Although its attack patterns were simple, this was already very unfriendly for newbie adventurers with crude equipment to begin with. As he pondered, the fire slime suddenly stopped. Its body wriggled, and it opened its non-existent mouth toward Burning Feather, spitting out a fist-sized fireball. Resound. Robin's reaction was as fast as lightning. Her staff pointed directly at the fire slime as she uttered a brief incantation. An invisible, piercing soundwave shot through the air, accurately striking the fireball while it was still mid-flight. Boom! The fireball detonated prematurely in the air, exploding into a brilliant shower of sparks. Burning Feather couldn't help but twitch the corner of his mouth. And it has magic attacks. This wasn't just unfriendly to newcomers, this was a downright, newbie killer. Which normal newbie adventurer could handle a monster with long-range magic attacks on their very first trip into the dungeon? But, since it was a monster born from the dungeon, it must follow the dungeon's laws. Its weakness was definitely its magic stone. No matter how strong its regenerative power was, as long as the magic stone inside its body shattered, it would undoubtedly die. Having figured this out, Burning Feather hesitated no longer. He pushed off the ground with explosive force, charging forward like an arrow released from a bow. His longsword no longer aimed for a single lethal strike. Instead, it transformed into a flurry of sword lights, continuously slashing at the fire slime's body. After several flashes of sword light, the fire slime's gelatinous body finally couldn't withstand the assault and was completely sliced into several pieces. A magic stone emitting a red glow was consequently exposed to the air. This time, the slime fragments that fell to the ground did not attempt to heal. It seems that as long as the damage inflicted instantly is sufficient, it doesn't have time to regenerate. Burning Feather made a judgment in his mind, discarding the idea of directly attacking the magic stone. After all, destroying the magic stone meant no income. That was a last resort for desperate situations. He stepped forward and picked up the trophy, a magic stone noticeably larger than a goblin's, along with a dropped, still warm mass of fiery red slime. Is this the special monster that appeared because of your skill? Robin walked up, her beautiful face wearing a trace of gravity. It's much harder to deal with than goblins. She had also seen the information provided by Aina. The fire slime was a monster that simply did not exist on the first floor of the dungeon. Not to mention, monsters capable of releasing magic should at least be mid-level hellhounds. Although this fire slime's attack power was far inferior to a hellhound's, its troublesome nature was already enough of a headache for newcomers. At that moment, waves of exclamations and screams, mixed with the explosions of fireballs, faintly drifted over from other passages not far away. Burning Feather and Robin exchanged a glance, seeing the same thought and a trace of a bitter smile in each other's eyes. Clearly, the surprises brought by the gazed abyss were not solely targeted at him alone. The entire first floor of the dungeon was being forced to welcome this unwarranted trial for newcomers. For the guild personnel guarding the entrance of the Tower of Babel, this day felt exceptionally long and bizarre. From early morning, a large number of novice adventurers had been scrambling out of the dungeon in a state akin to a rout. Their faces bore the terror of a narrow escape, with many showing obvious injuries. Some had arms and cheeks burned red and blistered, while others had eerie frost clinging to their equipment, their lips turning purple from the cold. What shocked the guild staff even more were the tattered weapons in their hands. The blades, which should have been sharp, now looked as if they had been thrown into a furnace, covered in scorch marks and pitted with gaps, almost completely ruined. Monsters, new types of monsters. A red slime that breathes fire. My sword melted when I struck it. And a blue slime that shoots ice pellets. My god, why is something like this on the first floor? Panic spread through the entrance plaza like a plague. News of the new monsters appearing in the dungeon spread with astonishing speed, carried by these retreating novice adventurers, and reached the guild's ears immediately. In an instant, the entire pantheon was shaken. Over the years, the dungeon had occasionally shown abnormal activity, but those changes had always been within controllable limits. A situation like this, where entirely new species emerged out of thin air, was unheard of. If it were just one or two, it might be handled as a special incident. But according to reports from the scene, the number of new monsters was overwhelming, covering almost the entire upper layer area. Quick! Report this immediately. Seal off the upper layer entrance. Temporarily prohibit LV.1 adventurers from entering. All advisors must immediately calm the adventurers under their charge and gather information. The guild headquarters was plunged into unprecedented busyness and tension. Finally, this emergency report was passed up through the ranks and delivered to the deepest part of the guild, presented to the god of the guild who had never left since the age of gods, the great god Oranos. Guild headquarters, the deepest underground prayer altar. There were no ornate decorations here, only ancient stone walls and eternal, unextinguished candle flames. The air was filled with an ancient and sacred aura, completely different from the clamor outside. On the throne at the center of the altar, an old man wearing a hood slowly opened his eyes, which seemed to have seen through the ages. Oranos, the dungeon has changed. Was this within your expectations? A neutral voice echoed in the empty altar. The sage Fells, clad in a black robe and also hiding his face with a hood, appeared silently beside the throne. Unforeseen. Oranos' voice was aged and calm, revealing no ripples of emotion. But this is a good thing. The appointed time is approaching. Any change is not a bad thing for us. A flicker of doubt passed through his eyes, but more than that, there was a sense of anticipation. With Orario's current combat strength, it is completely unable to cope with the moment that is about to arrive. A change in the dungeon means the challenge has escalated, and challenges, in turn, foster faster growth. Perhaps, the hero capable of creating miracles that the gods await will also emerge amidst this transformation. Fells. Oranos gave the instruction. Tell them there is no need for panic. My prayers are without issue. Have the guild personnel immediately begin investigating the newly appeared monsters, compile information, and properly calm those frightened children. Understood. Fells bowed respectfully, and his figure once again melted into the shadows. Upon receiving the divine oracle from the great god Oranos, the entire guild leadership breathed a collective sigh of relief. They blindly trusted in the unceasing prayers of this guardian deity. The guild's chief administrator, Royman Martel, even used a handkerchief to wipe the cold sweat beading on his plump cheeks. With such an unprecedented upheaval occurring in the dungeon, he, as the highest-ranking person responsible for daily operations, bore the greatest pressure. For a moment there, he even felt his heart was about to leap out of his throat. Since the great god has spoken, all that remained was to execute his will. As the guild is a neutral organization without private armed forces, investigating the dungeon is typically entrusted to powerful familias of impeccable reputation. Soon, a mission commission marked urgent and high priority was sent to the Loki Familia located in the 8th district. 8th District, Prosperity Street. The Loki Familia's headquarters, Twilight Manor, is a magnificent complex composed of several towers. At its center stands the thickest and largest main tower, surrounded by 7 slightly slimmer spires. The whole resembles a fantastical castle standing within the city, serving as both a home and a fortress. At this moment, in the main tower's lounge, the red-haired deity Loki was sprawled unceremoniously on a sofa, clutching an empty wine bottle in her arms and humming an off-key Kansai folk tune. She had fiery red hair and a flat-chested figure, her pretty face showing a hint of drunkenness. Ha! New monsters appeared in the dungeon. Upon hearing the guild envoy's purpose, the tipsy Loki abruptly sat up straight, her narrow eyes instantly regaining clarity. Oh yeah, such an interesting task. We'll take it. Upon learning that the guild was commissioning a mission, and one concerning the investigation of unknown new monsters, Loki immediately and decisively gave her approval, her eyes sparkling with excitement at the prospect of stirring up trouble. Deities inherently pursue the unknown and entertainment. How could Loki not be interested in the dungeon undergoing an unprecedented change? Regarding this, the Familia's captain, the Prum Fin, who was sitting nearby polishing his spear, had no objections. He just instinctively licked his thumb, feeling a faint, almost imperceptible sting at his fingertip. A trace of gravity flashed in his wise blue eyes. His intuition was telling him that the emergence of these new monsters was no accident, it signified the dungeon was becoming even more dangerous. Hey, Finn, Loki said, waving the commission document as she sauntered over to Finn, who should we send this time for maximum fun? Just then, with a bang, the hall doors were shoved open. Several of the Loki Familia's core members, Tiona, Tion, Ice Wallenstein, Lefia, and even the usually solitary Bet, all rushed in together. Sorry, Captain, I couldn't stop them. Tion apologized somewhat sheepishly to Finn, but her eyes, fixed on him, were gleaming. Captain, I heard there's a guild commission. Is it about the new monsters? Let me go. Let me go. Tiona completely ignored her sister, who was currently, in heat, over the captain, and raised her hand excitedly. I'm going too. Ice stood there with an expressionless face, yet her golden pupils shone with determination. I want to go with Miss Ice too. Lefia, who had been following behind Ice, mustered her courage and voiced her opinion softly. Sigh. Riveria, who had entered last, helplessly covered her face with her hand, revealing a headache-inducing expression. Read good books from Taiwan with ease and peace of mind. Finn looked at the group of overly energetic members before him and couldn't help but smile. You've come at just the right time. He picked up the commission and glanced at it. In that case, you all can go. The mission is to investigate the new types of monsters appearing in the first 5 floors of the dungeon and collect detailed information on them. He had already assessed this mission. For first-class adventurers like Ice who were level 5 and above, there was no danger whatsoever. Woohoo! Long live the captain! Tiona cheered excitedly, feeling like she could go out and have a good time again. I'll go along too. A clear, cold, yet helpless voice rang out. Riveria pressed her throbbing temples. She really couldn't rest easy letting Ice and this group of problem children team up and act. Oh, that's wonderful. Upon hearing this, Loki immediately grinned and spoke in her usual teasing tone. With Mama-san along, I'll feel even more at ease. Riveria elegantly rolled her eyes, shooting her own deity a look that said she couldn't be bothered. Soon, this temporary investigation team composed of Orario's top combatants was assembled. Riveria, Ice, Tiona, Tion, Lefia, and an impatient-looking Bet, the 6 of them left Twilight Manor and headed straight for the Tower of Babel. Meanwhile, on the dim second floor of the dungeon. Clang! The dull sound of metal striking wood echoed through the narrow rocky passage. Burning Feather sidestepped to avoid a powerful swing. The sword in his hand, which should have been finely crafted, let out a groan of strain after blocking the crude wooden club wielded by a hilichurl. At this moment, he was surrounded by 5 hilichurls. Hilichurls are monsters standing 1.2-1.5 meters tall, stocky and stout with short, thick limbs, gray-black skin, their faces covered by simple totem masks, sparse brown hair on their heads, and long, thin, pitch-black ears. They also do not belong to the dungeon, they appeared because of Burning Feather's skill. 2 hilichurls wielding wooden clubs acted as the vanguard, roaring and pressing their attacks. One hilichurl holding a crude wooden sword was more cunning, constantly circling and looking for blind spots in his defense. On a rocky outcrop behind them, two archers were continuously knocking arrows, firing deadly, unexpected shots. Huff. Burning Feather's breathing was somewhat labored, and fine beads of sweat had already appeared on his forehead. Using the uneven rock walls around him, his figure weaved and dodged within the confined space. With a light tap of his toes against the wall, his body shifted sideways as if defying gravity, narrowly dodging an arrow shot from behind. The longsword in his hand sliced through the air, leaving trails of silver afterimages, precisely parrying and deflecting the attacks coming his way. But each collision sent a numbing shock through the base of his thumb, and the damage to the sword's body grew increasingly severe. The strength and resilience of these monsters far exceeded that of the goblins on the first floor. Just as he was entangled by the three melee hilichurls and struggling to break free, an archer in the rear seized the opportunity once more, drawing its bowstring taut. Resound. At the very moment the arrow left the string, a clear, cold, and brief incantation sounded. Robin had been standing quietly at the edge of the battlefield, her lake green eyes calmly analyzing the entire situation. She hadn't acted rashly but was waiting for the optimal moment. Now, the moment had arrived. An invisible, sharp sound wave erupted from the tip of her staff, arriving later but striking first, precisely intercepting that arrow in midair. A piercing hum echoed as the wooden arrow was violently shattered in the air. Then, an ear-piercing sound wave shot straight toward the archer hilichurl. That archer hilichurl let out a pained grunt, covered its ears, and temporarily lost its ability to attack. The skill effect of Drunken Prelude quietly activated. A faint, warm current fed back into Robin's mental world, replenishing some of the mana consumed by her earlier spellcasting. This allowed her to provide more sustained support at a lower cost. Burning Feather seized this critical opening. He abandoned defense. Pushing off forcefully with his feet, he leaned his body forward. His longsword transformed into a swift streak of light, sweeping upward to deflect a hilichurl's club, then the tip of the sword go with the flow thrust upward, accurately piercing the opponent's defenseless throat. Having succeeded with one strike, he didn't pause. With a twist of his wrist, the bloodied blade swept out horizontally, forcing the other two melee hilichurls back. Simultaneously, using the momentum of his spin, he charged toward the other archer who had just recovered from the soundwave's effects. That archer panicked and tried to retreat, but Burning Feather was faster. A flash of cold light passed, and its head flew into the air. In an instant, 2 out of 5 were gone. The remaining 3 hilichurls let out furious roars, their attacks becoming even more frenzied. Burning Feather took a deep breath and met them head-on. After another intense skirmish, at the cost of a fiery, bruised graze on his left arm from a club, he finally cut down the last hilichurl. As the last monster turned to black ash and dissipated, Burning Feather leaned on his sword, his chest heaving violently. Robin walked forward, skillfully picking up the few magic stones and a rough totem mask scattered on the ground, placing them into her backpack. Looking at Burning Feather's somewhat weary expression and the sword in his hand, now covered in notches and even slightly bent, she said softly, "We should head back." Burning Feather nodded, letting out a bitter laugh. They really should go back. With his level 1 strength, if he were facing ordinary dungeon monsters, he could probably fight all the way to the 5th floor without much trouble. But due to his passive skill, the monsters it spawned completely exceeded the standard strength for the current tier. From the fire slimes and ice slimes on the 1st floor, to the electro slimes and wind slimes on the 2nd floor, and now these hilichurls who understood basic coordination, their combat power was more than a notch above goblins and dungeon lizards. This also caused his stamina consumption to increase drastically. And the most fatal issue was weapon wear. After just half a day of fighting, this fine weapon crafted by the Hephaestus Familia was already on the verge of breaking. If they continued fighting, it would probably snap during combat. Robin took out half of the magic stones harvested today from her backpack and handed them to Burning Feather. Burning Feather accepted them. With a thought, he invested all these magic stones into the entangled fate system in his mind. It could be seen that the edge of the originally dim, colorful starlight icon on Burning Feather's consciousness panel had developed a faint, almost imperceptible glimmer. That's right, his golden finger needed magic stones to recharge. Once the energy was fully replenished, he would be able to perform the next summon. He didn't touch the remaining magic stones. They still had to live, there was a useless deity who couldn't do anything but eat cake to support, and they urgently needed to replace their weapons and equipment. All of this required money. Fortunately, the drop rate of these special monsters was quite good. In addition to magic stones, they also obtained a large pile of various slime mucus and hilichurl masks. Burning Feather guessed that these were valuable materials, he just needed to hand them over to the guild for appraisal, and they should be able to exchange them for a considerable income. After organizing the loot, the two set off on the path back to the surface. Just as they were following the path they had come from, returning from the second floor to the vicinity of the first floor entrance, a group of people walked towards them. It was a team with an aura so powerful it was eye-catching. Leading them was an elegant high elf, followed by a golden-haired, golden-eyed damselet who was as exquisite as a doll, two noisy Amazon sisters, an impatient silver-haired werewolf, and a nervous-looking elf girl trailing behind. Burning Feather's pupils constricted instantly. Loki Familia. Ice Wallenstein. He recognized this group of Orario's top combatants at a glance. Just as the two groups were passing each other, the silver-haired werewolf, Bet Loga, suddenly stopped, whipped his head around, and locked his sharp gaze firmly onto Burning Feather's back, his nose twitching subconsciously. What's wrong, Bet? Is it someone you know? Riveria noticed Bet's abnormality and asked. Ah, Bet's brows furrowed tightly, his face full of confusion and bewilderment. How did he become an adventurer? In his memory, wasn't this human brat from the far north unable to receive a god's blessing due to some special reason? Tiona, who was nearby, immediately exclaimed exaggeratedly upon hearing this. Could it be a friend of yours, Bet? No way, how could you have something like a friend? Shut up, you Amazon idiot. Stung in a sore spot, Bet instantly became furious and roared viciously at Tiona. Who are you calling an idiot, you idiot werewolf? Tiona wasn't about to take that lying down and retorted immediately. The two instantly began to scuffle, making the already crowded passage even more chaotic. No, please don't fight, young Miss Tiona, Mr. Bet. Lefia tried to break up the fight, looking at a loss. Riveria sighed wearily and pressed her temples again. She knew that bringing this group out would never end well. In the crowded passage, Burning Feather did not look back. But he could clearly feel a sharp, wolf-like gaze pinned firmly to his back, full of astonishment, confusion, and inquiry. There was no need to guess, it was Bet Loga. He had recognized him. In Burning Feather's mind, the memory of that snowy farewell 5 years ago surfaced instantly. Bet came from a beastman tribe in the far north, a tribe that happened to have frequent trade dealings with the village where Burning Feather lived. Because of a fight with other beastman children one time, the two unexpectedly built a good friendship. Later, a dragon that escaped from Dragon Valley wiped out the tribe Bet belonged to. The surviving Bet, carrying a deep blood feud, left his hometown and headed to Orario to seek power. 5 years ago, when Burning Feather was 11, 16-year-old Bet returned. By then, he was already a somewhat famous adventurer, and he had killed the dragon that had been entrenched in his hometown all by himself, completing his revenge. Afterwards, he had found Burning Feather covered in blood and invited him to go to Orario together. What's the point of staying in a small place like that? Come with me, Burning Feather, Orario is where you should be. Burning Feather still remembered his appearance at that time, as well as his own reply. I cannot receive a god's blessing. Even if I go to Orario, I would just be a useless person who cannot fight and cannot survive. Now, 5 years had passed. He was 16 and had finally embarked on the path of an adventurer, but he was just a newly registered LV.1 rookie. And 21-year-old Bet was already a cadre of the city's strongest familia, Loki Familia, a LV.5 Level 1 adventurers, with the title, Fierce Wolf, his fame resounding throughout the world. The gap between the two was already like heaven and earth. Feeling the gaze behind him finally disappear as the group from Loki Familia walked away, Burning Feather breathed a sigh of relief and continued walking without stopping, taking Robin out of the dungeon. As they stepped out of the Tower of Babel and returned to the sunlight on the surface, Burning Feather felt the heavy sensation of being gazed upon by the dungeon quietly dissipate. The effect of his skill the gazed abyss had ended. This also meant that within the dungeon, apart from those slimes and hilichurls that had already been birthed but not yet eliminated, no new special monsters would be born. This would bring quite a bit of trouble to the Loki Familia, who had come to investigate with high expectations. Strange, what's going on? Tiona waved her massive double-edged sword, Urga, and kicked a stone out of boredom. Didn't the guild people say that the new monsters were everywhere? We've been looking for almost half a day, so why have we only run into these few scattered ones? It is indeed strange, Riveria also frowned. According to the descriptions from those rookies, the spawn rate of the new monsters should be extremely high. Now it looks more like the state after a monster feast has ended. Ice said nothing, simply silently using the tip of her sword to dissect a fire slime she had just killed. Looking at the red mucus and magic stone, a thoughtful expression appeared in her golden pupils. This highly anticipated investigation mission ultimately ended hastily, amidst the disappointment and frustration of the core cadres. On the other side, Burning Feather and Robin returned directly to the guild headquarters. When they pushed open the doors, they immediately saw Aina pacing anxiously at the reception desk. Mr. Burning Feather, young Miss Robin. The moment Aina saw them, she cried out in surprise, her heart finally settling. She hurried over, her beautiful eyebrows tightly furrowed, carrying an obvious sense of lingering fear. You've finally returned. The dungeon underwent an anomaly, and you two rookies never came out. I was worried to death and was almost about to find other adventurers to commission them to go down and look for you. That's the end of part 1. Part 2 is coming soon.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and support our channel for more stories.